Hey, Matt.
Seriously?
Hey everybody, hope everybody's back. Got some food and are just about ready to go. So I'm just going to hand things off to Rob, assuming he's here. He's going to introduce Will and we're going to take it from there. So thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody for joining today.
Thanks, mate. Again, I won't apologize for saying it, but these guys did an amazing job putting this together. So yeah, I appreciate you guys doing it and obviously wanting me involved and play a very small part in making this happen. So over to you, Will. Can you share your screen?
Yep. I'll share it here and start my presentation.
Amazing. Can hear you loud and clear. So over to you, buddy.
Everything you can see, everything all right?
Absolutely. Looks great to me.
Okay, great. Well, appreciate you, Rob. We're coming live from Orchard Park, New York, in my basement where I've been quarantined for the last 3 weeks. So it's nice to have some type of human interaction, and even if it is virtual. So I appreciate everyone that's coming on board. This is a great event. I'm glad to be a part of it. It's cool to see how many people are on this, even if it is virtually. Strength coaches, trainers, everyone coming together for a common cause. So I'm the type of person who likes to ask a lot of questions, and it probably gets on people's nerves that I'll even answer a question with another question. But it's not really to get on people's nerves that I do it. Really, it's because there are a lot of confusing problems in sports that we see. And what makes it harder is that simple answers don't always tell the whole story. So with that in mind, over the next 40 minutes, I urge you not to expect just cookie cutter answers, a prescription of what to do. Instead, I want to leave you with better questions to ask and more clarity around the context that we find ourselves in and the problems that we face. Now, I'm going to start with a little story about myself. Now, when I was 5 years old, I was at my dad's baseball game, and I'm sitting with my mom, and I was probably annoying her in some way. And she said to me, "Will, go count the blades of grass over there." And as she tells it, I came back and I said, "Well, how do you know that I'm right?" And now that story has a little bit of a parallel to a really uncomfortable problem that I see that we face in our industry. How do we know we're right? How do we know our value? How do we know we're bringing value to the team? And most important, how are we evaluated? There's a lot of gray area to this, and there always has been. It's always been a confusing question to me. There's no stat or ranking system to say, hey, you're the 17th best strength coach in the country, keep it up. But at some point, we have to go into a coach, an AD, a GM, any key stakeholder, and we have to say to them, here's how I brought value to the team. Or if you're in an interview, here's how I plan to bring value. But again, it's a very complex question. It's a confusing question. So if we really look at it, the nuts and bolts, we're judged off wins and losses. And whether that's fair or not, I'm not here to say. But at the end of the day, it's wins and losses. Now we can set a culture, we can develop relationships, but in my experience, no matter what, if you're losing consistently, it doesn't matter the relationships that you have, you're not going to be coaching there very long. So in terms of that, obviously we don't have as much control as we'd like over wins and losses, but we do have control over two things: the health of the player and the athletic development of the player. Now, I say athletic development or athletic performance because there are a lot of interdependent parts when it comes to performance in general on the field, on the court, whatever sport you're talking about. Within that performance, we have the capability to improve or enhance or develop certain physical capabilities that are necessary, but not sufficient for overall sports performance. So if we look at it in terms of injuries and athletic performance, I believe those are the two biggest influences that we have on wins and losses. Now, both of those are not simple either. Those are pretty complicated. Not only are they complicated, we have control over some things and no control over other things. But again, that's what we're evaluated on. And I'm not going to stand here and say we shouldn't be evaluated on these things, because we should, and we're going to. But can we ask better questions and understand our context better so that we can show what type of value that we bring, instead of just saying, well, I got him stronger, or yeah, these guys, they didn't get injured, so that's good. There has to be some type of evaluation process to determine whether or not we're doing a good job. So today we're going to use a sense-making model called the Cynefin framework. And the Cynefin framework is invented by a man named Dave Snowden. And there are a lot of words on the screen, and this is a confusing slide with all the different parts of the framework. So let's zero in on each one of the different contexts. So we're going to start with the obvious. Now, problems that fall into the obvious context are predictable and repeatable, and there is one best practice. Now, I'm going to stop right there and discuss best practice, because in strength and conditioning and in performance, we talk a lot about best practice. But what does that really mean? What it means is there's one correct answer, no other thing. There is an established practice. It is a ledger sheet. It is money in, money out. It is a best practice. It's a cause and effect, predictable and repeatable. And I want you to remember that as we go through these things, because a lot of times as strength coaches, we try to make complex issues obvious, or what used to be known as simple. So let's move to complicated. Now, complicated is also predictable and repeatable, but it takes a little bit more analysis. It takes an expert opinion. And I think we can see a lot of these things that we dive into in terms of our research, but it takes expert opinion and analysis in order to understand and solve the problems that fall in these categories. Now, here's where things get a little bit dicey. And this is where we see a lot of our problems in sport fall, is the complex context. There is no predetermined cookie cutter right answer. It is not predictable. It's not repeatable. There are a lot of moving interdependent parts like we see in the things that we're evaluated in. And what comes from that is emergent practice. And emergent practice means we're going to set out on the path and the answer is going to reveal itself to us. Now, the last one is chaotic, and that brings novel practice. And you could probably say there's a lot of things in the world right now that are chaotic, and it calls for innovation and novel practice, new practice. But we're going to keep it to sport. Now, this model was not necessarily invented for making decisions in sports. It's a leadership model. And businesses across the world use this type of framework to decide where problems lie and how to best make decisions. So what I want to do is go through a couple examples of each of these contexts, just so we're clear and we're all on the same page. So we're going to start with obvious. Now, in terms of obvious, I use a picture of this pendulum swing, or these balls on a pendulum. We all know that if I pick up one of the balls and drop it, what's going to happen to the opposite side? And it's going to come right back through, and it's going to be a predictable, repeatable pattern that it's going to go back and forth until something acts upon it. That's Newtonian physics. Now, I'm going to use a car analogy for each one of these contexts as well. For a car, it would be like having an empty gas tank. The best practice would be to fill that gas tank up in order for that car to run. Once it goes empty, you have to fill it back up. Agreed upon best practice. For complicated, I used a picture of Albert Einstein's E equals mc squared, the theory of relativity. Now, once you go through the math, which I can't do because I'm no expert, it's predictable and it's repeatable. Albert Einstein was an expert who needed a lot of analysis to get to this point. Those are complicated issues. Now, they're still predictable and repeatable, but they're complicated. They take analysis. In terms of the car analogy, putting a car together takes a lot of different parts, but they have assembly lines, which requires a very standard, predictable, repeatable response. But it takes a car manufacturer to know what should be built first. Should we put the frame together, then the axle, then the wheels? But we see this in a lot of different ways, this good practice. There are multiple right answers here. There are cars that are designed differently. There are cars that are put together differently, but they all run. So there are multiple good practices. Now we get to complex. And I used a picture of a tree because this tree grew differently than any other tree in the history of trees. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of interdependent parts. There's different amount of sunlight, different direction of sunlight, different amount of rain, the soil that it's in, the wind that it's blowing, the different type of tree that it is. And some things about trees I probably have no idea about that are making this tree grow in a certain way. Now, here's the important part about this tree. If it were next to my house and it started leaning, I know that I have to chop that thing down because I don't want it to fall on my house. But I wouldn't know that until it started growing. I could shape the path a little bit better by watering it a certain way or creating structure around it so it grew straight up. But until that thing started leaning towards my house, I wouldn't know whether or not I'm supposed to cut it down or let it keep growing. But again, I'm being responsive to the emergent practice that we're seeing. And I know that if I have to chop it down, that's the right answer, the best decision. Now, let's go back and I'll talk about the car here. Imagine you're driving down the highway. In the complex context, you're driving down the highway. I know the exact route I need to go from the facility that I work in to Orchard Park, New York, where I live. Now, as I'm driving down this highway, I have a person on the left of me and a person on the right. The person on the left of me is driving fast and checking their phone. The person on the right of me is a lot older and doesn't have much peripheral vision. Now, I wouldn't know whether or not I'm going to get into an accident or I'm going to be safe until I see what's emerging in front of me. I might have to slow down and let this guy cut me off, or I might have to speed up and get around this other person. The person that's on their phone or thinking about work or not engaged in their driving, they might throw me for a loop, and all of a sudden I have to slam on my brakes. But again, I'm not going to be able to make those solutions until that practice is emerging in front of me. So we'll go to the last one of chaotic. Now this is Times Square, and anyone who's lived or been to New York City, and I was lucky enough to live right outside of New York City when I was at West Point and go to Times Square all the time. I know for a fact that if I wanted to get from one side of Times Square to the opposite side, there was no predictable, repeatable pattern. I wouldn't know how to get to the other side except just to dodge people as best I could. People are looking up, people are looking down at their phones. There are the people in the costumes trying to take pictures of you. You're watching out for someone trying to mug you. Whatever it is, there's no predictable, repeatable pattern, and it's just chaotic. Now, if you're thinking of the car analogy, think about a big accident or a pileup or a highway with no lanes, people trying to go left and right, trying to figure out what's going on. And the solution to this is just creating order. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just someone needs to take order and figure out what is going on. So as we take a look, I hope we have a better understanding of what the Cynefin framework is looking at, and understanding that problems fall in different categories in different contexts. And we have to understand where the problems that we face in sport fall in order to have more clarity, provide better decisions, and show our value, because we're going to be evaluated in some way on these things. So what I'm going to start with for us in sport is injury prediction. And I put injury prediction here for a reason. Because at the current moment, with the knowledge that we have or technology, we cannot predict injury. And if we've been paying attention to the Cynefin framework, we know that complex issues, which injuries are, cannot be predicted and they cannot be repeated. Now we can go back and have retrospective coherence and say, oh, I can see why that person got injured. But at the moment, we're not able to look to the future and say, I know this person's going to get injured. So I'm going to cross that out and I'm going to say injury risk. So in terms of injury risk, if we're getting evaluated, what's the goal? Well, it's pretty simple. Reduce the risk of injury, or at least it seems simple. And at least it seems simple to me. So when I was at Southern Utah, it was my first chance to be a head strength coach, a director of performance at a university. Very grateful to have that. And this is Tyler in the picture. And Tyler let me use this picture. All the players I'm going to talk about today, I contacted to make sure it was okay with them. And Tyler was a linebacker for us. And like I said, I was gung-ho. I knew what I was going to do. I learned programming from Preston Green and Charles Poliquin and Tim Karen. I learned how to be a great coach. I learned how to set a culture. I thought I knew everything. I thought I had the way to prevent injuries. And that was going to be put a whole bunch of muscle mass on people, get them really strong, get them really powerful, train them on the field like football players, and we're going to be great. We're not going to see any injuries. Now, Tyler here, as you can see, we put on about 9 pounds of muscle. He power cleaned 315 with great technique. From the floor to his shoulders, great catch position with speed. He full front squatted 365, full depth, full range of motion. His biomechanics, we worked on it every time we were out there on the field running. His top end speed mechanics. I had the plan. We're going to work the plan, and we're going to keep him injury free. Now, day 3 of camp, torn ACL. Couldn't believe it. He was one of my best lifters, one of my strongest lifters. We had 25 guys that year power clean over 300 pounds, and just as many guys, if not more, front squat at least 365. I thought that was going to be strong enough. We put on a whole bunch of muscle mass as a team. We ended up with 4 ACLs and 13 surgeries. Now, some of it might be luck. That's maybe what I chalked it up to. So I started to dive a little bit more into the literature. And I wanted to look at, okay, what are the factors of injury? And here is a extensive but not exhaustive list of different types of retrospective, prospective studies, modeling injury. And you can go, there's a great article on sportsdiscovery.net about the development of these different injury prediction models over the last 30 years. I would highly recommend you read if you're interested in understanding injury risk more. Now, you can understand this a little bit more as a complicated problem, right? There are experts arguing over injury risk. We have load management with Gavitt and Impellizzeri. We have hamstring issues with Bourne and Timmons and Bosch. Hewitt talking about ACLs. Now, we're still seeing the same amount of ACLs and the same amount of hamstrings, groins, shoulders. We're not really seeing a linear trend down in any of these injuries. And Dave Snowden, the man who created the Cynefin framework, contends that if there are a bunch of experts that can't come to an actual conclusion, you're not in a complicated problem. You're in a complex one. So let's view it from the complex context. Now, this is taken from Bittencourt and her colleagues of the Web of Determinants, a great paper discussing how we're supposed to look at injury or how we can look at injury risk. As you can see, she gives an example of 2 different ACL injuries that have 2 very different web of determinants, of factors. Now, there are modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. There's strength and power. There's body composition, muscle mass. There are non-modifiable factors of age and sex and previous injury history. We could probably talk a lot about what the risk factors are, both physical, psychological, modifiable, and non-modifiable. But there are a lot of things going on here. And again, we're evaluated on these things that are very complex. So to go along with that, there's another injury prediction or understanding injury piece of literature from Stern and his colleagues about injury as a nonlinear system. And I think this is a great example of how complex it is. So as he shows his determinants of injury, and if we went back a slide, obviously there's a lot more than just those 6. You see the athlete as the gray sphere and all the determinants as the blue spheres. Now, as we start to stress the athlete in some way, we start with practice, load, getting them stronger, helping them cope, whatever it may be, those determinants that are either going to push them closer to injury or take them away, as we start to implement them, we start to get towards this danger point. If we get too great of a weight, as you see in the red spheres, that start to weight them into a dangerous point, it's important that we understand what the determinants of injury are so that we don't fall into that injury valley. So what could happen, as you see in this example, there's too much load, there's poor coping skills, and if there's nothing done about it, potentially with a poor movement strategy, this athlete's going to fall into the injury valley. Now, if we were to understand that, red flag that, show the risk, and do something about it, maybe we pull back on the load, improve their movement strategies, reduce the amount of fatigue, help with their coping skills, and they fall back into the healthy valley. But this is confusing. I'm not saying this is an easy, simple solution. We're never gonna have an objective feedback of exactly where they are on this nonlinear scale. And that's the point, that it's complex. So how are we supposed to be evaluated on this? How are we supposed to give clarity to our coaches and our GMs and our ADs to say, here's how we're going to understand risk and make better decisions about it? Well, the first step to me is that we have to ask better questions. And in the complex framework, they talk about probing, sensing, and then responding. Probing is enacting the plan. Sensing is seeing what's going on and what is emerging during the plan. And responding is your reaction to that. So the questions to this would be, what are the modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors for these players? How can I create the best plan, the foundation of a plan? And does anyone see it differently? And I'm going to hit on this point and this question because we all have our egos and we all have our own understanding and our own perspectives, but it's important that we gather all the perspectives of reality and all the perspective of our staff or our colleagues or anyone who's witnessing what's going on so that we may be able to see in a different way. Because like I said, it's not predictable, it's not repeatable, and we don't know the answers. We're not all knowing. So we should be taking everyone's opinion into consideration of what we're actually seeing. As we enact the plan and we start to sense, well, what do I need to monitor? What patterns are emerging here? And who do I need to communicate this with? And as we sense what's going on, we get better at sensing and understanding, we respond. Do we need to change? Who needs to know this? And are all the situations the same? Because our understanding of reality constantly updates. After this talk, hopefully everyone's going to be a different person. After the next talk with Bob Alejo, they're going to be a different person. We need to update our reality and understand the situations. Our players change, our environment changes, the day changes, their physical and psychological readiness changes. So we have to constantly update that. But again, this is confusing. There's a lot of things going on. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to provide a little bit more clarity. I'm going to take the example that I gave with Tyler, and I'm going to tell you how I would approach it now with this probe, sense, and respond model. So with Tyler, I'd identify whether or not he was a high risk. Now, had I done my homework, I would have known that he had fractured his ankle a couple of years before. And at the same time, a year before that, he had had a bad concussion. Now, maybe he lacked some range of motion on his right leg, which he ended up tearing his ACL. Maybe he had poor proprioception. Maybe had I tested his eccentric hamstring strength, we would have found something, maybe an asymmetry. Maybe he was weaker than I thought. Maybe that was a risk. We were about to start camp. That's a high spike in load. Now, had I understood that, I could have helped develop a little bit more holistic plan for him. And the most important part about this is I could have communicated that plan. I could have said, hey, coach, here's what I'm seeing about our high-risk players. Here's Tyler. He's had a pretty extensive injury history. I'm worried about his health. We're about to start a high training load. His hamstrings aren't as strong as I'd like them, which we're working on. And there are other factors here at play that I'm a little bit worried about his load spiking high in camp. So here's what I'm thinking. Maybe we pull back on the special teams drills for him. Maybe we don't come out of the gate sprinting 1,000 yards of high-speed running off the bat. Maybe we start with 500, then 750 and 100. Either way, that communication piece is huge because I'm making a good decision. I'm making a better decision than I otherwise would. And it's important that I log that so that at the end of a season, when a coach or an AD or GM or a key stakeholder says, hey, why did we have these injuries? Well, here's the decisions that we made. I discussed with coach about pulling back because he was a high-risk guy, and he ended up getting hurt. Here's what we did to prevent that. We have to admit that maybe it was not preventable at that time. Now, when you go back and show that you had that requisite information about making the best decision, it's easy after the fact to say, oh, we missed this. We should have seen this. But with the information that we have, we made the best decision because we're constantly, as practitioners, making decisions with incomplete information. And we have to be great at that. We have to be great at making those decisions with incomplete information, because we're never going to have all the information. But being able to show that I made a better decision is important to how we're evaluated. So as I would have enabled this plan, I would have set him on a path that I thought would have been best. But again, plans change. So I would need to monitor that, monitor his training load, monitor his hamstring strength, subjective feedback on his physical and psychological readiness, have discussions with the player, have discussions with the coach. How was he looking? How do you feel? And of course, we're going to allow for some failure in there, because this is not a repeatable, predictable problem. In fact, this isn't a fail-safe plan. This is a safe-to-fail plan. So as we look for emergence, we communicate all these things. We're able to respond to whatever we see. And that's the biggest thing about our environment. We have in college 105 players. In the NFL, it's a little bit less, but you still have all these players. It becomes chaotic if you don't understand what's going on. We're just trying to move that to understand a little bit more complexity and get it out of that chaotic environment. But what we don't want to do is make it obvious or even complicated, because it's not predictable, it's not repeatable. So as we respond to that, we communicate, we adjust, we update our reality. That's how I would approach this very confusing problem. And at the end of a season, or at the end of a day, or at the end of my career, I can say I made the best decisions that I could with more clarity during that time. So as we take a look at the Cynefin framework one more time here, we can see that as a young strength coach, I was trying to put everything in the obvious and complicated context, but it's not. Injuries are not obvious. They're not even complicated. They're complex. And that's difficult. It's confusing. But if we can have more clarity, if we can give better decisions and show our better decisions, we can be evaluated a lot better and show our value. So the next one we're going to talk about is periodization. Now, periodization is a theoretical model. And there's a famous quote that all models are wrong and some are useful. Because periodization is a plan, a set in stone plan. I'm going from point A to point B. And here's how I'm getting there. But as we discussed, things aren't that obvious. They're not even complicated. They are nonlinear and they're complex. So I'm going to cross out periodization. I'm going to call it planning, because plans can change. Plans can be adapted. And that's what we're really doing, is we're planning athletic development. So in terms of planning, what's the goal here? Well, the goal is to improve athletic performance. As simple as that. Let's go back to Southern Utah, 2016, head strength coach, real green, excited, can't wait to get these players better. Here's Mike. Mike was our best athlete, still is a great athlete. He was coming off a sophomore season, All-American, great. I thought to myself, man, I'm going to get him stronger. I'm going to get him more explosive. I'm going to get him faster. I'm going to put a bunch of muscle mass on him. He's going to leave here, this FCS school, after his junior year, head of the NFL. It's going to be great. Well, he had a good season. There's no NFL season. And now looking back on that, I can see I approached it as an obvious problem. I approached it as I'm going to put muscle mass on him, get him stronger, get him faster in the weight room, and he's going to be a better football player. And now this might be uncomfortable for some people, but us getting people stronger in the weight room, us getting more powerful in the weight room, putting muscle mass on them, does not make them a better football player. Being a better football player makes them a better football player. Again, necessary, but not sufficient. And we can't just check a box and say, well, we got them stronger. Because in the weight room, we can use that as weight room KPIs, not necessarily football KPIs. We can change 4 things, in my opinion: strength, speed, size, and shape. We can probably add a few things, take a few things away, but we can increase the total amount of force that a muscle can produce. Great. The rate in which it can produce it, the size of the muscle and architecture of the muscle, and someone's energy system development, their conditioning levels. But here's a confusing problem. What is strength? Why aren't powerlifters really good football players? Why aren't the strongest people always the best football players? Do we have an answer to that? Well, play strength might be different than weight room strength. Now, had I sat down with the linebackers coach, which it was Mike's coach, and said, hey, coach, you're saying he's not playing strong. for example. What does that mean? Show me on film. Is it his positions? Is his technique? Is his ability to get somewhere faster and hold his position better? Is it his ability to get into the gap faster and then he's in a better position for his technique? Is it his understanding of the game? And we start to have this cross communication between coach, position coach, and strength coach, and we're starting to understand who Mike is better and what he actually does need to change. Does he need to get stronger in the weight room, or does he need to get quicker in his burst so he can get there and be stronger? Is he getting knocked off the ball? Does he need to add weight? Okay, where does he need to gain weight? All these questions refer to the strength, speed, size, the shape, the things that we can change in the weight room. But how are we knowing that they're transferring to football? Because our job is not to get people better in the weight room. As practitioners, it's for them to be better football players. And again, that's uncomfortable to hear sometimes. It's uncomfortable for me to understand because I can coach a clean really well and a squat really well. I can put muscle mass on someone. But are they getting better at their sport? Because we're evaluated off wins and losses. So we got to ask better questions. Probe, sense, respond. What are the indicators of success? Is the indicator for him to be a better squatter? Is it for him to be a better cleaner, or is it for him to be able to tackle better and play stronger? Because again, they might be correlated, but they're not causation. Correlation versus causation. So how can I create the best plan? And does anyone see it differently? Again, a really important question. When I sense, do I need to monitor? What do I need to monitor? What patterns are emerging? Who needs to know? Who needs to be communicated about this? How do we get everyone involved? And then I need to respond to what's happening. Do I need to change the plan? Who needs to know this? And is the situation still the same? So I'm going to go back and I'm going to have a little more clarity about what I would do now with Mike. He's coming off his sophomore season. Here's how I would approach it. Identify the most important needs. I'd go to his linebackers coach and our head coach and say, hey, I got Mike here. These are the things I'm objectively seeing in the weight room. He's not very strong. He could get stronger in terms of his squats and his deadlifts and his ability to create force. We can use an isometric mid-thigh pull, however we want to see it. I'm seeing that he can improve his reactive strength index, for example. Okay, well, he seems pretty reactive on the field. He seems elastic, he can get places fast, but he's getting blown off the ball every time he's trying to get to the line. Okay, well, do you think that's something that we need to talk to him about? Is he sensing something wrong? Is he having trouble with his vision? We can dive however deep we want into that, but we need to understand what are his important needs so that when we start training it, we can see subjective and objective feedback of, well, he's getting strong in the weight room, and coach is saying, man, he's not getting blown off the ball anymore. This is great. When he's in the box, he's playing physical. Okay, well, we must be doing something right. But we wouldn't know that until we enabled the plan and then started to sense what was going on and monitor it and allow for a little bit of failure, look for emergence and communicate this. And then respond by either adjusting where necessary, communicating what's going on, updating our reality, and running with what works. So if something is working, it's not always about changing it. If something's working, we're going to hammer that home. Maybe it's something that was unexpected that's working great. Man, his hamstrings are getting stronger. He seems to be getting faster. Let's hammer those hamstrings getting stronger. But again, we wouldn't know this, just like the tree or the car. We wouldn't know these things until we saw them emerging, and then we can make better decisions. So the Cynefin framework. We see that problems fall in a lot of different categories, to be exact. The obvious, the complicated, the complex, the chaotic. As a young strength coach, I was trying to put things in the obvious best practice because I thought there was a solution to everything. I thought there was a best practice to everything. Hey, there's an answer. Give me the recipe. I'm looking for it. And that's what I'm not given here today. The complicated, I started diving into research. Well, all these experts are arguing about these good practices. And we say in our industry, you can skin a cat in a million different ways. Hey, you train like this, I train like this, we're all getting stronger. Okay, well, what are the interdependent parts that we see in the complex context that we're really evaluated on? And then how do we keep it out of that chaotic environment? So again, it comes back to, how do I know I'm right? How am I evaluated? How can I show my value as a strength coach? Because we're going to need to show our evaluation in some way to get a job, keep a job, show that we can get a raise, whatever it is. But it comes down to making better decisions and asking the right questions and not expecting answers. So before I wrap it up here, and I see I about 35 minutes, so that's pretty good to get through there. I want to give some gratitude to some people. Obviously, this is a great production. I'm really honored to be a part of it. I hope that we continue to raise money. And I know there are companies out there that are continuing to donate, and I really appreciate that. I know we all appreciate it. We're all trying to do our part to stay safe. More importantly, I want to give some gratitude to some specific people. My wife first, because she's been dealing with me for the last few years, 5 years, 6 years now. And she's dealt with me in the last 3 weeks in this quarantine. So I have to give her a hand. My family, who supported me through everything. And then chronologically, the people who've had the biggest impact in my career and mentored me in person in some way. And then every coach and AD and GM who I've worked for or whom I have worked, every coach, AT, researcher, author, anyone that shaped my thoughts in any way. Because I wouldn't be standing up here talking about my mistakes or the Cynefin framework or making better decisions if it weren't for the things that I went through with these people and try to understand how we're evaluated better, how to be a better strength coach, and what does that mean. So I'll finish it there and I'll open up for questions, and it seems like we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I hope I get some good ones.
Absolutely. Got plenty of time for questions. Well, thank you very much. I'll work my way down the list in a second, but I've got a couple of my own from a very selfish point of view. So if anyone's got any additional questions, like Will said, we've got plenty of time. So pop it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. One of my first question was, how difficult was it for you to accept that there wasn't a recipe? And that transition, I'm guessing that's a difficult thing to come to realize, that them answers aren't always there and as simple as you'd maybe want them to early in your career.
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out every day. I'm sure there are things that I'll approach that someone has to remind me, hey, it's not that simple. Oh man, you're right. And our reality and our environment is constantly getting updated. Now, at some point, maybe these things become obvious and simple. As technology advances, our understanding of the human body advances, maybe they move from complex to complicated. And there are good practices for things. And then maybe we understand it so well that it does move to obvious. But at the moment, the way that we're evaluated and a lot of the things that we deal with are in that complex context. So there are certain things that fall into the obvious and complicated, or different decisions that can be made and repeatable and predictable. And as someone who has leadership in any way, you're going to be able to leverage your decision making better by understanding where problems fall. So obvious problems, when they fall, those are easily delegated. Hey, I can have a junior member of staff or someone take care of these smaller problems because we all know it's best practice. And same when something complicated comes up, you might rely on expert opinion. But it's important as someone making a decision, if you just rely on one expert, you might be getting a confirmation bias, or you might be getting just one side of the one part of the picture. So as we label things as confusing in the confusing context, it's important that we leverage all the experts to try to understand a better picture. So it's using a framework like that just to make better decisions. And I think we'll continue to be confused about where things lie all the time. But having that perspective and that awareness first is the first step.
Mm-hmm. I know for a lot of, especially younger coaches, social media is a prime place for learning, for deciphering information. Yep. From your point of view, how difficult do certain practitioners, researchers make it when there is this back and forth and polarized viewpoints? It can be really, from my point of view, it can be really difficult for the young coach to, again, decipher that information. They're going there to get expert knowledge, but them experts are bickering between themselves, which doesn't really help the situation, especially in this context from what you're talking about here.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the intentions on social media are always positive. But people are trying to put out good information so that we can be better practitioners. I was actually having a conversation with a friend, Eric Potter, yesterday about this. Is as we read one polarizing thing, often my suggestion is go find the exact opposite and read that. When you're having an argument with someone and you guys are on polar opposite sides, reverse sides and argue the opposite way. Because the more we can see from different angles, our perspective grows and our understanding of actually what's going on is better. And that's really hard to do. And personally, for me, I've gone through my Twitter and Instagram, any type of social media, and I've weeded out any things that aren't important to me, right? If I don't want to pay attention to politics this time, I'm just going to get rid of all the politics on my Twitter feed. But what I found, and being honest about my reality, is that I start confirming my own bias, that I'm following these researchers that research and cite each other. And, I get Google Scholar updates of new articles being cited, and I go through the 15 emails I get a day, and they're the same articles. And I recognize that and say, okay, well, maybe I need to branch out and try to understand a different perspective, because maybe the hamstring research from Timmons and Bourne, maybe I need to read more about what Bosch is saying and what their arguments are. And not saying who's right or wrong, but when I face these situations, can I draw from different people and different opinions and see it in a different way? So social media is great. It's just setting yourself up to navigate it in the right way.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that was on my list, but it's also come up here, is, and I'm interested to know why periodization became planning, and just a bit more depth on that. And I know it seems like a nuanced question, yeah, but based on your presentation and how you're thinking about things, I'm guessing there's a bit more of a deeper meaning there than just a change of name.
Sure. So I came from the Charles Poliquin tree, and Preston Green was my first mentor, and he's Charles's right-hand man. I got to spend time with Charles a lot, and we talked a lot about periodization. And obviously he had his very strict ways of training and his methods. Now, what I started to realize is that I would train players in this way to get stronger or put muscle mass on, and there'd be a bell curve of people that adapted, people that didn't adapt, and then really high responders who maybe I needed to change for them. And the problem is we tend to get judged off the outliers. We can't just say, oh, we got all these people strong. Well, the people who didn't respond very well might be the ones that got injured. And the people on the other side, who are the high responders that we didn't push far enough, never reached their potential. So a lot of times we're seeing this bell curve that, yeah, some of these periodized models where we're trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, it gets some people strong, it gets some people fast, it gets them better in the weight room. But a periodized model is just that, it's a model. It's not changing, right? If I were to put someone on, I'm not going to throw out any different type, style of training, but put a person on that and say, hey, we're going to do an 8-week block of this. We're going to do a 12-week block of this. And we're going to have the whole team do it. You're going to get mixed results. So if it doesn't work for one person and it works for another, who's to say that it's right? But it's our job not to put a model onto everybody, but to plan for everyone. And I think that is a very small nuance, but plans can change, plans can be adapted. The models stay the models. So for us to have more clarity and ask better questions like I'm talking about, and how we're going to be evaluated, is the success of whether or not we're keeping players healthy, and are we improving or enhancing their athletic performance. And I would struggle to say, and of course I don't know everything, I'm still searching for the better answers and the more clarity, but I would have to say that using a model that's strict is a very simple or obvious way in that context to say, well, this is the best practice, I'm going to use this method because it's worked before for me. And that's a tough place to be, because we're shooting in the dark. And all of our, as strength coaches, our salaries, how we put food on the table for our families, our jobs are reliant on being evaluated on these things. So just taking a standard model and just forcing it on everyone is, maybe it'll work sometimes, but it's not going to work all the time. And I'd rather be in control more about what is working for everybody, less than just the bell curve. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just going to dive into some of these questions here. Okay. Deborah DeFranco, she's asked some really good questions. I don't think I've actually put them out there. So thank you to Debbie for asking them. But one thing that's come to you, Will, what other healthcare and athletic professionals besides the ATC do you work with to get more clarity?
Yeah, everyone and anyone. I mean, our mental skills coaches, our athletic trainers, physios, dietitians. I think that's something that is overlooked quite a bit if we're trying to change any type of physical capacity, the nutrition that goes along with that to support the goal. I mean, everyone that's on a performance team has a part in trying to raise up the athletes. And it's not just ad hoc. That's one thing that I've always found is, oh, you want to go talk about nutrition? Go see our dietitian. And then things get lost in translation. They don't know who the dietitian is. They don't feel like going all the way across the building to go meet with that person, or they can't schedule a time. It all relates to each other. And we should all have an understanding as a team to say, well, I can give the requisite information. And if we want to follow up further, let's get the dietitian in here. And we're creating these plans where if I'm over top of these athletes, I can give them all, I can have the agility to talk about any different thing that we want. So I work closely with our athletic trainers, our dietitian, obviously the rest of the strength coaches, mental skills coach, our sports scientists. I mean, there are so many different departments that have a role in building up and keeping our athletes robust and healthy and resilient. And having cross communication between that, and I'm not even talking about yet about the position coaches and the head coaches and management or whatever level you're at, the people that have contact and touch points with players. If we're not communicating about these, it's a lot harder to come up with a holistic plan.
Cool. Anonymous attendee, I'd prefer if people put their names. I'd like to give people a shout out if they could. What have you seen is the easiest way to reverse engineer the game? And obviously reverse engineering has been talked about a lot, but what's the easiest way to reverse engineer the game?
Yeah, and that's a great question because in my context, I didn't play football. I played baseball in college. And I actually started as a basketball strength coach. And it wasn't until I got to West Point in 2014 that I even started in football. So it was really unique for me to be able to try to learn the game. And I'm still learning the game. In fact, when I'm in individuals, I still got to ask coaches, what am I supposed to do? You know, or just tell me when to run. But with that being said, the most information I've ever gotten about a sport is asking the player. So if I have a player who I'm trying to change their physical capacities, and I'm not asking them, hey, how do you feel when you're out there? What does it feel like? Do you feel like you're getting off the ball fast? Do you feel like you're slow? Do you feel like you're sluggish? How do you feel? Do you feel heavy? What's going on here? And their response to me, since they're experts in their sport, are usually a lot more informative and educating for me than it would be to look at the bioenergetics of a sport or the biomechanics that they need, because they're experts in their body, and everyone's body. Now, here's another confusing problem is that everyone's body is different and it reacts different and it feels different and they perceive things differently. So the communication, the relationship you develop with the player, to me, is the best way to reverse engineer anything, because that's the specific thing that I'm trying to get across to that player is, okay, a coach says he's not getting off the ball very fast. He's telling me that his ankle hurts and it's been bothering him for the last 2 years. It's just been sore. Okay, well, if now we can fix that, maybe it's not an issue of understanding the bioenergetics of the game. It's understanding what's going on with that player.
Sweet. Diving back into the questions, a really good one from Lauren. So how do you balance the line between exploring anecdotal observations through experiences and the lack of support to use an intervention that has a lack of scientific evidence in the practice / intervention, therefore making the situation right between complex and complicated?
Yeah, Lauren, that's a great question. And I don't know if I always have the answer, but I think, not to be cliche, but there's an art and a science to everything. Now, Charles Poliquin, love him or hate him, he was many years ahead of his time in terms of understanding eccentric training. He saw that he could bias that to get someone stronger. And as you see that, and you see people getting stronger that way, well, I'm seeing an emerging pattern happen, right? I'm seeing that as I bias accentuated eccentrics, these athletes their strength numbers are going through the roof. Now, that's gone from complex because we're seeing an emerging pattern to now a very complicated problem. It's moved, as you can see in Tim Suckelmel's new paper on eccentric training, is we know a lot more about it. We know that we're going to change the architecture of a muscle in a very specific way by increasing fascicle lengths in series by accentuating eccentrics. And so that's something that's moved from anecdotal to a complicated problem just based off the amount of research that's being done. And we can start to see, since that pattern has become stronger and stronger and stronger, it moves from a complex emergent pattern or emergent practice to a complicated good practice.
Sweet. So Andrew Carter, so with the understanding that most people in hiring/firing decisions don't necessarily have the context expertise, I think this is a really interesting point. How do practitioners convey these complexities to those coaches, athletic directors, and GMs?
Yeah, Andrew, you said? Andrew asked that?
Andrew, yeah.
Andrew, thank you. And another thing we're all still trying to figure out, right? This is a difficult framework to navigate, which was why I thought it was a cool thing to discuss tonight. But the biggest part of this is keeping records of what you're doing. And in the time that you're keeping the records, determining the things that you knew at the time and why at that time you thought it was the best decision. Because if we can log that and show why, while, a year later, you're thinking to yourself, how would I have made that dumb mistake? Because I could do that plenty of times in my career. Why would I think that would have worked? But if you go back in your log and say, oh, these are the things that I understood, these are the things that were going on, that's why I made that decision. That's a lot more powerful than meeting with the coach and them saying, well, why did we do this? And you don't have an answer other than, man, it seems boneheaded now. But that is a great way to show your value of, I'm constantly evolving my knowledge and I'm constantly trying to make the best decision. And that's how I'm going to be able to show my value and be evaluated on that. Because there's no objective data to say that we're good or bad. And if we go off of man games lost, that's a dangerous game to play. Very dangerous, because there's a lot of things that are not in our control. So I don't want my salary or my job to rely on luck. I want to be showing that I'm making the best decisions.
Which is a really a really difficult balance, I guess, because and people do go on injury rates and they hang the hat on it, and it can come around to bite you in the ass.
And that's fine. If that's what they want. That is an objective stat to say it. Now, I've been lucky in the past with teams that I've been with that we've had low injury rates, and I could probably hang my hat on it. But to be honest and to be fully transparent, as I'm sure the people on this call as well have experienced this as well, is the times where our injury rates are bad, we're like, well, that's probably luck.
Nothing to do with me.
Yeah. We did a great job.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
Of course. Yeah, it's interesting. The people at the time when injury rates are low, they're in the media and whatnot, and then kind of duck out of it when it goes the other way. But that's life, hey. So how have you approached similar topic? How have you approached the topic of complexity with a sports coach who may have viewed things in an obvious / reductionist lens?
Yeah, I think just having more discussions and being open and transparent with people, because, and I'll speak for myself again, is when things are confusing, it's really easy to reduce them down to simple things. And then we get attached to those things and we bias ourselves that is the right way to do it. And it's hard to take someone out of a bias. And it's hard enough to take ourselves out of the bias without being aware of it. So just having conversations and asking questions, and not questions that are demeaning in any way, but just explain it to me. And as they start to explain it, maybe sometimes they realize, well, it's not that simple. And then starting that conversation. But that's a soft skill that requires a little bit of motivational interviewing and trying to get a little bit more out of them, and not approaching it as I'm right and you're wrong, because again, we're talking about a problem that doesn't have a right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Sam Feldman, beyond some athletes you mentioned, were there any light bulb moment type moments that helped shape where you are in your thought process today?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of those, Sam. Those injuries were just one of the things, because like I said, it was my first time as a director and a head strength coach, and I felt like I knew a lot. I had done a lot of reading, and I'd been around a lot of great people, and I was standing on the shoulder of giants, and I was almost embarrassed at the end of the season to say, wow, I really thought it was going to turn out better than that. We were 7-5 and we had all these injuries. man, that was, all of a sudden my Twitter account got quieter and quieter. It's just one of those things. So I think there have been a lot of moments of, test, retest, where things didn't go as well as I thought they would. Or, a player that I'm trying to help lose weight all of a sudden comes in and gained 2 pounds that week. And I'm thinking to myself, I gave him all the information he needed to lose weight. What I didn't do was go a step beyond and set the path for them to be more successful and understand the intricacies of losing weight, or the psychology of nutrition, or the ability to give him the requisite skills to cook for himself and understand and give him purpose. So again, it's just every light bulb that's been turned on is realizing that I'm in a shallow water, or an area of shallow water, and I need to dive a little bit deeper and understand things better. And it'll constantly happen from my first day as a strength coach to my last. But it's just something that goes along with the territory.
Nice. Keep the questions coming as well. Some really good ones. How does developing systems for programming fit into all this? Is there a purpose to it? And that was from Nathan.
Developing systems for programming. I'm curious to an elaboration of that, or if you have a better understanding of that.
Ask Nathan to post in the Q&A again, and we'll get a bit deeper on that one. From my point of view, for an interesting one, and you mentioned about tapping into different areas for whether it's ATCs or nutritionists. When you're going to go up the chain and you're more of a leadership role rather than on the floor as much, how important for you is it to still have that link and that trade, I guess, as a leader, whether you've come from a strength coach background or a physiotherapy background, to still have your, like I say, trade, but also oversee the department and have the knowledge to be able to tap into and have conversations, the key conversations with each individual?
Yeah. I mean, the people that are in leadership roles for that are in a unique place because they may not be the best practitioner at any of them. I went and visited Lachlan Wilma. I went to Australia a couple of years ago, and what's always stuck with me was that he said, I'm never going to be the best anymore at any of the things that I'm overseeing. And it really stuck with me because it kind of took me a second to think about my ego of, well, I want to be the best strength coach. Well, what does that mean, first of all? And that would be hard to step out of that realm and watch someone else do something that you love to do. So there's a piece of the ego you have to step back. But what you realize is you're always learning more in every single context. And things are start to layer on top of each other, from anecdotal experience to more research-based and different practices. And then even outside of sports to learn about how to deal and manage with people. Now, if I were to say, well, I know everything there is about strength conditioning, I'm good with that. I'm no longer going to interface with those people. They just, I need to do this. I think I put myself behind the 8 ball. And so taking the approach that you're always learning something, even from your interns, even from someone coming from a different context, people on staffs that have people from different countries and different sports and different backgrounds, is really important to have some cognitive dissonance of, well, we can have arguments and discussions about whether or not you're right or I'm right, or is there a right, or what you've seen in your different contexts. So I think that answers your question, but really it's important just to interface with people and have communication and understand people's context and where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. And I've spoke to Lachlan before and about exactly that transition from being a strength coach and being obviously really passionate about it and going to a leadership position, having to step back and let someone take the reins, and how important it is that ability to be able to do that. Yeah. Especially when you're so passionate about something, you want to be hands-on, and yeah, that's a really interesting point. But thank you, Will. Yeah, really appreciate it. And obviously, thank you for the questions. And there's some that I haven't answered. So are you happy for people to contact you externally from this and just catch up with
yeah, I think questions? I put my Twitter handle on there. It's Coach
Perfect.
Or Will G. Shoot me a message or tweet at me or anything like that. I tend to be more of a voyeur on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those things. But I'm more than happy to respond to anyone who's reaching out and have a discussion.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much again. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. And now you guys got Bob Alejo, who's a legend. I can't wait to watch.
We absolutely do. Bob, are you there?
Indeed, I am.
Yes, here he is.
Will, you're killing me.
Ha!
We have to see your face.
I hope I warmed the.
Oh yeah, let me get this thing
Bob.
on here. Hold on, let me get the video on here. Well, where's the? Oh, there it is.
There we go.
There we go. All right, live and in living color.
Do you want to share your screen, Bob?
All right, here we go. What am I doing here? So we got share screen.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second here. Let me get. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put my email on here first, and then I'm gonna punch it up.
Yeah. If anyone's got any questions for Bob throughout this, just pop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I think I'm at.
Where are you putting that, Bob? In the chat?
I'm trying to get the. Okay. Hold on a second here. How do I get the? I'm almost there. I'm almost there. Hold
No
on.
worries, mate. No worries. No
I
pressure.
want to get the full screen on there. That's the thing. Got it?
I can see your screen.
Okay. Well, I thought I selected the.
There we go.
Is that better?
That's better.
Hold on. We got to start at the beginning, right? Let's see here. How do I get the full?
Just put it in presentation mode. I think you were just about going to hit it. Yes. That's
Got
good.
it? What do you think?
It's not.
We're close. We're really close, Bob.
Nearly.
There we
Yes, there we go.
Why is this thing lagging so? Oh, I see. Okay.
We got there? There we go. We're on.
Old guys, you can do tech. I swear to God.
Over to you,
Quality.
Bob. You take it from
Right.
here.
Probably twice as old as everybody on this damn call. Good to see you, Rob.
Thanks, mate. You too.
Wow, what an afternoon, huh? I've sat here, kind of doing my presentation while I'm listening to others, and felt really small a lot of times about how good some of the folks are on this broadcast. Man, what a great idea for the country, for the world to have something like this where you're donating funds, coaches coming in when they can, and I'm really proud to be a part of this. So let's just start with what my presentation is all about. I want to talk about the collegiate high performance model and not spend all kinds of time like, wow, this is fantastic. Look at us, look at me and all that, because there really isn't all that much to look at. I know I've talked to a couple of folks, Pat Ivy in particular, about what they're doing there. And, as a paper I'll mention later on in this discussion has written about, really very, very poorly defined, very vague, very ambiguous out there. And I think some of us who are doing it, I think Eric Korn's got something going on as well. A couple other positions have titles similar to the ones we have, but the roles are not the same, as this paper would talk about. So, let's go and look at a little bit of history. And all of us probably on here have talked about this before. The high performance model. Well, it's in Europe, it's in New Zealand, it's in Australia. We should probably have it here in America, right? Well, like many things we do here, I think we've really botched it, honestly. And those criticisms, those are things we talk about when we're sitting in the lobbies or calling each other on the phone and talking about hires or positions or places that have these sort of things. So I want to talk about, why some of these criticisms are warranted in some issues, but where are they coming from? One of the things that happens, first of all, is wow, didn't see that person getting hired, didn't see that coming. Somebody who is with a sport that hadn't been uh, exposed to that sport, or somebody who's younger. And for me, nearing my 40th year in the business, 10, 15 years for me seems young. And then now I look at this job, I don't think I could have done it in my 10 or 15th year, maybe not my 20th year, honestly. So the qualifications of some of the folks that have taken those positions, they're criticized. Some, you could say warranted or not, one way or another. Again, I think what that says is this role hasn't been defined yet for anybody, right? The models that have been put in place have been very poor, very, very poor. And again, I'll illuminate more on a paper we'll talk about later, that the roles are so poorly defined and expectation levels are so vague and ambiguous that they're almost not outlined. In the paper that I'm going to talk about, there was, I believe 6 or 7 job descriptions of this position, and none of them had many things of similarity in them. So sometimes you'll put somebody in a role that could be good, but you would never find out really, because the model and the role was so poorly defined that they couldn't meet an expectation, because there really was nothing definitive to evaluate upon. And then, as Will was talking about, if your team's not very good, then you're probably not very good. And I would agree with Will. Hey, that's a poor evaluation, oftentimes, of the performance group for sure. The role itself has to have some zap behind it. I've said this to anybody who will hear. This can't be even an assistant athletic director. It can't be director. It's got to be in the two but the two venues that I'm thinking about. It has to be assistant general manager, assistant vice president, or senior associate athletic director, for it to have the kind of strength behind the words that you're going to bring in terms of conclusions, decisions, and endpoints. If you're just, for instance, me, I go in and I talk about to somebody, it's not unlikely that my decision will be viewed as, well, that's the strength coach. Of course, he's going to think that the person needs to get stronger, or of course he thinks that weightlifting is going to cure everything. Which, again, you can understand that. At the same time, I know that's not accurate for me. I know it's not accurate for Pat, only because I've spoken to him. The others, I would assume, are the same. It's because that's what the collective group came up with. And when we leave the room, we all have one idea. So the strength of the role is not backed up. Again, when you look at some of the things that have happened collegiately, catastrophic instances or tragedies, just overall tragedies that could have been stopped from happening, whoever was there, trainer, physical therapist, strength coach, whoever that was, should probably have some sort of blame in there somewhere. I'm not saying to dismiss that liability, but in my opinion, unless there's a good high performance model in place, that is just a symptom, right? The problem really is poor leadership. It's top down. How strong are you at the top, so that people do understand where you're coming from with your decisions? Again, whether or not individuals getting hired for these spots are the folks that should be hired is really not the issue. The issue is who's hiring them, right? So the qualifications of the people hiring those positions probably aren't what they should be. We know that, especially in many, I would say the overwhelming majority of senior associate roles in the country aren't coming from people who are based in the performance industry, not coming from sports medicine, not coming from strength and conditioning, physical therapy, sports nutrition, not any of that. So hiring folks that they could only assume are good from some of the maybe references they got, but unlike us here and many of us on this call, we kind of know who those folks are, right? So it would make sense. So if you look at somebody who maybe didn't get hired, maybe they or were hired and weren't qualified, that is a result of the hiring practice. And lastly, of course, is the historical model in any kind of high performance model. The top part has always been the head sport coach. And of course, I think we can all not spend a ton of time on that in terms of the knowledge that's necessary to look at all those roles and evaluate is probably not as good as it could be. And there's also a certain amount of, which we've seen before, a certain amount of bias and a certain amount of conflict of interest, wanting good players back in time, wanting a certain physician because you heard that physician was good, those kind of things. That sort of thing needs to be out of the way if there's supposed to be performance and welfare for student athletes. This model right here is something from Smolyanov and Zakis, who essentially wrote this up, and it's more or less along the line of a corporate situation or like an NGB, a national governing body. And typically what's going to come from that is the macro and meso part is usually from administration, looking at things that are economic, looking at supporting agencies and partnerships. What we do at our level, along with leagues and institutions, is we look more at the developmental part, which is the mesos and the micros. We really look at those, that gray to the black, gray area, dark gray area as to where we're at. This would be a high performance model, more, I don't know, it would be more of a corporate structure, not the high performance model as we know it in athletics. There's no shortage of looking at what is high performance in business and athletics. I mean, they're all over the place. Trying to find somebody to actually grab the reins, steer the ship, organize everybody, and come up with a conclusion. But I can tell you that in my case, it's not all that difficult to figure out ours at the Division I level, in my case, at a mid-major. And it starts with the director of athletics. And it's not an accident that made that square really, really big. My opinion, and I think it's been established in several ways, several times, not just in the performance model, is I'm only as strong as, well, we have he is a male at our place as a director of athletics. And he has given me as autonomy as I could probably have, so that now it's clear to everybody else that what I say is essentially coming out of the athletic director's mouth. That's how it should be. So right now I have oversight over the director of sports medicine, the director of athletic performance, and the director of sports psychology, director of sports nutrition. They have a staff who report to them. They report to me. I think that's the most effective way to do it. And again, you'll see a couple of other notes here during my talk that it's really not that difficult to get the strategy, and it's not that difficult to get the schematic. To me, I think it's pretty simple. Then it comes down to, okay, well then, strength and conditioning veteran, who's the most qualified person for the role? Now, I've came out publicly many times and said, well, my opinion, I think it's the strength and conditioning practitioner. I didn't say it's the only person, because I don't believe that. I do believe that we are probably the most viable candidate for that. And in the high performance management model article that Smith and Smolyanov had written, the one I'd been referencing here for the last couple of slides, in that body, it says, we've been around a lot of people, and we've been a part of and cross-pollinated with everybody in that group. And so, as he says, it's the logical fit. And I see that to be the case. In fact, Gillette in 2015 had referenced that many in the Premier League were former strength and conditioning coaches. And he felt like, again, had backgrounds in nutrition, in sports medicine, in strength and conditioning, and looking for elite levels of attention in that area. But more importantly, we're coaches. We're coaches working with coaches. So we have something there that the other groups do not. The coaching and motivational and driving piece that we're valued for is a big part of this role, I think. So is there a better model? Is there anything else that we can do instead? Can you be successful with it? Well, sure you can. I think, in fact, actually that is the best model. But right now, well, for sure, again, using the term overwhelming majority, the overwhelming majority of schools do not have a high performance manager and still win championships. There's no question about it. But that doesn't mean that you can't get better. Okay, that doesn't mean you can't get better. So what is our goal then? The goal is, for me, our mission is to provide the best performance and welfare delivery system. That's the key for the student athlete. And in that, I find that this sort of method will streamline the communication, but not only the communication, because we know we have a reporting structure, but the application. So once you get that all organized and ready to go, it's easy to implement the tools of return to play, the tools of performance, the tools of adjustments and individualization and all that stuff. I think it makes it easier that way. But all in all, I can become a one-stop shop, right? Coach comes to me, asks about Will Greenberg. How's he been doing this week? Coming off his shoulder surgery. I say, he's lifting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right now. He's got therapy every day. He's got a physician's appointment update in 2 weeks. Nutritionist is modifying his diet because of his inability to jog right now. So we're looking at caloric deficits and gain, and that's it. Now he doesn't have to go all over the place. And neither does an administrator who in these major colleges are looking for star athletes who are on TV every weekend to return as soon as possible. So not only that a benefit, but on the opposite side of it, now coaches can just coach. Administrators can just administrate. That's their sweet spot. That's what they're good at. Let us do that. I'll come to you and tell you how everything else is going. Doesn't hurt to have an extra pair of eyes out there looking at things that we know and we understand, right? So oftentimes when you're in the training room, that's an extra pair of eyes that's looking through a sports medicine lens. In the weight room, a strength conditioning lens. If you're in the fueling room, through that lens, because we have a little bit of taste of that. We know what that means. And I think it ends up being the avenue for the quintessential development of an athlete. You think about everything we do here, all of it funnels into a certain area. All of it is into injury management. All of it's into performance. If you have performance, you do have injury management. So this thing washes itself in a very good manner. So I think, what is it that I did first? What is the thing that hit me first? I would say standardize. And probably the most standardized piece had to be the language, especially between athletic training and strength and conditioning, because there's a lot of things that we do in there that are identical. In other words, a squat in athletic training and rehab is the same squat we use in strength and conditioning. The hinge is the same hinge we use in strength and conditioning. The step up shouldn't look any different when you're doing strength work than if you're doing reconditioning or return to play. So we got to make sure that language is the same. Same within the weight room, right? When you have bigger staffs, which I had like at NC State, I had 14 underneath me. They all come from different places. So they call things the reverse squat or the reverse lunge or the one-legged squat. We need to make that language common. The athletic trainers, they all come from different places. So when they report injuries, they have different terms that they use. We got to make sure those terms are consistent and that we understand every one of those mean exactly the same. You have to standardize the reporting lines, right? You don't want the assistant sports nutritionist coming to me and complaining about the tennis coach. That's not the right reporting line. That goes to your oversight, which is the director of sports nutrition. Let them handle that. If that can't get handled, then we go up to the next step, and then that would be me. So the reporting lines also, unless they're standardized, there's something that can slow you down. Formal meetings, put them on the docket. We meet once a week, once every 2 weeks. That's going to depend on the size of your staff. For instance, in our case, our psychologist only works 20 hours with us. She's a professor in kinesiology. So it's unreasonable for her to meet with all 19 teams in a month's period in the performance group with all of us sitting. You'd like to have sports psychologist, the athletic trainer, the strength conditioning coach, and the nutritionist sit in a groups with the head coach and his staff to talk. In our case, that's not reasonable, but somehow that has to be formal. And of course, informal meetings are how things are really, really driven. Those walk-bys, those drop-ins, those meetings, in my opinion, become more important and certainly aren't as boring as the ones where you all sit in one big room. But those are very important. Documentation. I'm Sandy Alderson, who was the guy who hired me at the Oakland A's years ago, was GM, vice president, was the vice president of baseball, president of the A's as well at one point. He told me, drive the paper. Whatever you do, drive the paper. Even if you have to write the notes on a napkin, write it down. So, and that becomes really important when you get into those big debates amongst groups or coach to coach or sports administrator to athletic trainer. You got to have it documented. And the protocols have to be something that just can't be not only haphazard, but you can't have 15 athletic trainers with 7 different ACL protocols. You can't have 10 strength coaches with 6 different, what Joe Ken calls 0 level, right? It's got to be standardized so that you can compare things across the board. So I don't often have a corncob pipe, but the question is, what can we do to get better? First thing is, at least I don't know, and maybe ask Pat Ivory lady to come in on this one, but I could see everybody thinking I'm coming in like the big bad wolf. I'm going to change it all. I'm going to pull the plug here and add a plug there and all that. So I didn't have an attitude, but certainly the perception of that, you've got to be sensitive to it. And everybody along those lines, even the people that are in your community, the athletic performance group, sports performance group, even them at times could think, oh, maybe he's going to do this or he's going to do that. And that's going to take away from my ability. And he doesn't have the knowledge that I have. But frankly, I don't. Strength and conditioning may be the exception. But that perception becomes the problem. You have to make sure that you come in and you have, first of all, an organized plan that takes me out of it. It's not me doing this. It's the model that's doing this. That would be something that I think I encountered, either overtly or otherwise. But I understood early that it made sense, right? But for sure, I think the constant evolution is going to be fluid communication. I think you always got to keep that communication. It's easy to forget to make the phone call. It's easy to miss the one meeting, to walk in the training room after a lifting session and talk to somebody. It's also easy for the athletic trainer not to go in and make that last minute change to a program that just happened on the field in the weight room. Fortunately for us, our weight room door and athletic training door is only about 5 paces away. Still, there's a lot of things going on, right? So we've got to always, that's where I come in. I have to see that and manage it. That's why I think that extra pair of eyes, that extra body helps out to coordinate those events. In our case, again, we didn't have a lot of tech before I got there. Now we do. So a lot of the return to play came out of just, athletic trainer, common sense and intuition. And so now that we have that data, we want to use it so we can come to a better conclusion, to closer to certainty. And so it's on me to make sure that we try to do that. I don't have anybody in the athletic room that doesn't believe in that. That's not the case, not at all. So, but the habitual part of that is not there yet. We're going to get there. I want my people to have a consistent, strong message to coaches. And we all know that as strength coaches and athletic trainers have it way worse than we do when you talk about being pressured for certain things. We've got to be able to tell the coaches, which is backed by me and backed by the athletic director, this is how it has to be. This is in the best interest and welfare of the student athlete to have the nutrition decision come from the nutritionist, and that it's a hard decision. That's what we're going to follow. And that's fighting history a little bit. So we're working on that. And I think you also have to understand that, you know, your resources, which is personnel, that's going to determine the speed and flow sometimes of messages, programs, and decisions. And that's, you know, we don't have as many personnel. We only got 2 full-time strength coaches on staff. So that makes things a little bit more difficult for us, but that doesn't dismiss the value or the importance of getting it done on time. We've got to work around that. So it's okay, here's who we have, now what do we do? And I think the last thing is to understand the kinematics and kinetics of exercise and the common language that comes with it, because again, you know, we can't say in athletic training, hey, we're doing the step up as a progression to come to you in the weight room, coach, when that step up doesn't look like the step up it should be. We know what the mechanics should look like, and we know what we need to target with certain injuries. We have to make sure that there's a good understanding of what those things look like and what's being accomplished by them. And just because it's in rehab or strength and conditioning doesn't mean it's different in the other realm. Any questions up to now?
We'll do them at the end, Bob, if that's all right.
Sure.
Cool.
Sorry to wake you up, Rob. I didn't mean
No,
to.
I'm here. I'm here, mate. Don't worry about that.
I'm busting you up, pal. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Well, let's go then. All right. So, you know, I talked to Drake, and we talked together about, you know, the high performance model and how it looks in action. I thought we'd try to look at a return to play. Again, I think the thing that's going to drive this talk the most is the participants being involved in asking the questions. You know, that's where the discussions become really, really good, because I know I'm going to miss something. I know I'm not going to answer something. So I need to have a lot of involvement. So let's go with this. You can look at this ACL return to play model, but really it is nothing more than the return to play of most everything, right? We've got to be able to have everybody talking all the time when it's super important, when it's necessary. It can't be done any other way. Every one of those people have to be involved. Pre-screenings have to be done for us to understand what ACL is like. I mean, one of the things that I've done here, talked to Tim Hewitt, Mick Hughes, Burt Mantle, talk to them about this. And if you look at some of the research and some of the things they've done, they will tell you one of the primary pieces of mitigating injury is of the screen, an early screen. Just not that alone, though. When you take that and then look at all the other field tests and all the strength measurements, power and speed tests, that's going to help you come up with some plans. So those things have to be in place for ACL return to play. Again, not all that much different for regular injury. Standardized plan. Where is the integrated rehabilitation coming, right? When does rehabilitation with the athletic trainer end and strength and conditioning begin, right? When does conditioning end and adding that into practice now? When can you go into practice while you're still conditioning? When can you go from modified practice to full practice? And just because you practice full time doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be game ready. Those decisions have to be made, but that has to be standardized. We have to have metrics. We have to have metrics that say this is okay. And frankly, if you have the ability to have metrics and use them and you're not, it's a crime. You should be able to use those so that you can be feeling really good about putting that athlete back out in the field of play. And all that criteria should come stage to stage. We should know, and it's been documented many, many times, in generalized terms, how long it takes to do this, how long it takes to do that, an ACL play in particular, unloaded body weight only, loaded, all these things, they have particular timeframes to them that are completely necessary. And during that whole thing, and I'm finding this to be more relevant than ever, great documentation. I mean, nothing bugs me more than going to a strength coach who say, you know, somebody's got a bad ankle or somebody's got a hamstring. Said, okay, so what do we do for alternative conditioning there? Well, you know, you rode the bike for 20 minutes. Okay, what heart rate? What load? What speed? Those things are important. Riding the bike for 20 minutes, well, I can do that. So, I mean, that's not what we're looking at. I want to see it all. I want to see every possible thing. And so that we know what we're doing is the right thing. So I think this is really one of the real examples of why the high performance manager is needed in this case, right? So if you look at the commonly cited ACL factors, I mean, there's what do I got here? 7 written down, and every one of these are well documented. Some more than others in terms of percent of risks. But if you even look at, you know, core stability, for example, that's a perfect example. So if you look at the definition there, you're going to see it's not just the abs, it's not just planks. And, you know, again, I've got one phrase that I've been attributed to in my entire career. I mean, guys like Cam and Josh and those guys, they probably have, 30 or 40 great sayings. Mine was, when you tell me about an exercise and I don't understand what you're telling me and the words are really big and long, I just say, why don't you tell me what it is and I'll tell you what we used to call it. So that's the piece in this thing here. So years ago, the core was, we all knew it, right? 30 years ago, it was the glutes, that circle that gets drawn around the glutes in the midsection. The abdominals are part of that. The extensors of the back, the erectors, those were all part of it. And that's not new. That's not new at all. Bering Sorensen wrote it out in 1984, this very thing. It's a lot of things in the lumbopelvic hip region. So to go in and say, hey, we're working on core, if I see a program that just has planks, then we're not doing that. And we know that the core contributes a lot to ACL injury. You can have great glutes, you can have great knee, but if you can't control your upper body shifting, which changes the loads down in the lower body, you're going to hurt yourself. So that's something I need to be able to be familiar with. Neuromuscular imbalances, family predisposition, all this stuff, extrinsic, previous injury, all those things are important. The other part of the importance of me looking at that is coming out and saying, whatever injury is, hey, how are we doing in that area? Or not having a strength coach or a physical therapist or a trainer come to me and say, man, we have a lot of calf injuries. And when I look, I'm looking at the incidence and the severity and I don't see it, right? In ACL situations, it's not impossible that, we have family predisposition, and previous injury on one team. Some schools have recruited brothers and sisters. And some schools have recruited kids who are already hurt. So when you start looking at injury data and you say, wow, we got a lot. And you say, wait a minute, that's a previous injury. That's a family injury that's predisposed. We know that. So that, do we really include that? We don't dismiss it, but we don't have to go through and change everything we're doing because of that. So there's another thing that I'm able, this position is able to mediate that's sometimes not seen. And again, it's not all that complicated. Tim Hewitt's done fantastic work. Anybody on social media of any sort has seen his work. He's fantastic. He was really good with talking to me and sending me texts and emails and direct messages on questions I had. But it really comes down to these 4 steps, right? And every injury is that way, right? Look at the extent of the injury problem. Like, if you find out you're having a wrist in baseball or an elbow in baseball, how often is that happening, right? The other part is, all right, well, let's take a look at the etiology and the mechanisms. What exactly happened there? All that stuff that we just talked about on the back page. where is all this? And what Tim has done here is he's put in these boxes all the studies for ACL stuff, which I think is curious because, you know, ACLs are not new. They've been around for a while. So, and there's plenty of information out there. Makes us all wonder sometimes, is this ever going to go away? It doesn't appear to be the case because even in some of the literature it cites, despite all the information on ACLs, we still see, you know, prevalence there. But after you figure out the mechanisms, you look what it's going to take to try to prevent it, energy sources, biomechanics, and then you check to see if what you've done makes sense. I think that's the way it should be. In our case, and probably the cases in some, and I will say this, not a shameful plug for Hawken Dynamics, a great plug because I love their stuff and I love how they've helped us. We try to get everybody back to 90% of the healthy state, right? 90% of the vertical jump, 90% of the long jump, the 5, the 10, 10-yard sprint, the 20-yard sprint, the 300-yard shuttle, whatever we're using, whatever's available, whatever is applicable, we want to get there. We use Chris Powers down south. He does a movement performance assessment program in his clinic. Plenty of stuff that we don't have that he uses, that he's got plenty of data on that was used before I got here. So he's got good data on our group. One of the metrics you want to use in your head is how many times do we go back? How many times do we go forward? Common sense involved, and certain length of an injury is really important, especially like in a hamstring. You get a hamstring out there 3 or 4 weeks. Now you're not only just worrying about getting the hamstring strong, but you are worried about being deconditioned. So that's where the length of the injury and the progression involved becomes really important. So if we take a look here, again, I don't honestly think it's that hard. I did add a couple of extra things in there, which is, you know, we have injury, we go to rehab. Then we have return to training, we have return to sports skills, we have return to practice, and then we have return to competition. Even within those categories, there's a certain area in there that there may be 2 or 3 subcategories. So for instance, return to training. So the trainers are going to have you do balance drills, cone drills, a little bit of running, a little bit of change of direction, but they wouldn't really be considered conditioning or training. They're just trying to get movement, neuromuscular stuff back, that sort of thing, and I think that's important. But return to training is, are they going to be able to do a stride workout? Are they going to be able to do a sprint workout? That's the training part. Return to sports skills. It's not unlikely that they're going to be doing some conditioning before they're dribbling a ball, before they're swinging a bat. When is that going to happen and when is that appropriate? And that's not going to be in a group. Then it is, when are you going to return to practice? When is that going to be able to do that? And that return to practice, for instance, in soccer or football, maybe, and then later contact. And then it's return to competition. Because again, even though you've gone through these 4 or 5 steps, that doesn't mean you're ready to play. That's up to the coach. We can say you can play. That's up to the coach. But in the end, whenever these steps happen, the return to competition has to be a unanimous decision. It has to be. It shows unity. It shows we understand. But more importantly, we'll have the data and the wherewithal in the subject matter to say, we think based on our data that this person's ready to play. That's going to be our case. So let me just say, let's go back to what Eric Renahan was talking about this morning, and even I think somebody else Eric talked about it more than anything, because I used him on this deal. So when we talk about the return to play, let's talk about, say, hamstrings, for instance, right? So we use force plates on hamstring. I looked at the force plate on a hamstring that I thought was healthy and getting close to being ready to run. I watched him run. I told him he looked good, and he said, I still can't go full speed. Now, to me, he looked agile. You know, he's a base stealer, left-handed bat, speed's his game. Try to figure out, okay, well, let's get you, let's do some running with you. Found out that at an elongated stride, he felt it. So, okay, let's stop there. Let's get him on the force plate. So we got him on the force plate. And what we ended up finding, when he jumped high. In fact, and Eric will attest to this, he set a PR in his vertical jump. But when you looked at his footprint on the force plate, it almost looked nothing like his original jump. So he didn't have to learn how to jump. This wasn't like the Nord board or some test where learning the test was part of getting better at it. The biggest thing that came out to me was his landing was way stiffer. And all of us know that when you land in a max vertical jump, you're going to get down into a squat, you're going to dip in. And when you hinge at the hip, you're going to involve the hamstring. Well, he landed straight-legged because when I laid that over the other one, he didn't. So he was protecting his hamstring. That told me that despite his increase in vertical jump, he was not ready to play, not ready to play at all. The second phase of that was we use the Nord board whenever we have that as a test that's applicable. In this case, it obviously was. So I said, okay, we finished the, and I hadn't even looked at the data yet, but I said, okay, a good job on the force plate vertical jump, which was a counter movement with the dowel across the top of the back, a PVC pipe. We do many jumps without the arms. Jumping is a skill. So for instance, if we had a basketball player or volleyball player do it with the arms, that is going to be, it's not going to be comparable to a soccer player who rarely uses their arms when they're jump. So we do use arms in the volleyball players jump, but we also do our jump protocol, which is a dowel across the back. So I said, okay, well, good job jumping. Now let's do this. You think you can do the Nord board? He said, oh no, I can't do that. Okay. So we had the Nord board. This time the Nord board worked without us doing it. It's not easy for those of you who've done the Nord board, but he knew right away, I feel okay, but I don't feel okay enough to do that. So those were two things that I couldn't see that without this tech it wasn't going to be helpful. And so the other thing with the force plates is just, as we jump, for those that we have it for, we can look at progress, week to week progress. And then as we get closer to that 90%, but then we're going to look at a lot of metrics, much like what Eric does in his. And of course, if I ever have any questions, I call him and we chat a little bit. But those are some important aspects of things that you can't see, right? And so when you have the ability to test it, you should use the ability to test it. So in the end, what I talked about today was kind of the sequence of things, a little bit of history. High performance model is the best model for both performance and welfare. I don't talk about injury prevention because I, like many, think that the performance model, performance training is injury prevention. And I don't even like to use the term prevention, but injury management. But it also comes in many, many, many forms. Sports psychology, some of those forms, how things are going outside of the sport and in the room. But in the end, what we'd like to have is the subject matter expert handle their part of the deal if there's any decision to be made. And in the end, we'll rely on that information and come out of the room with just one thought. That shows a organized approach and something that's obviously had some time spent on deciding. So far, there's my email, and there I am on Twitter. That's sort of what I wanted to talk about today, but I can take any questions about anything at any time, and let's have at it.
Let's do it. There's a few questions come in, which is great.
Good.
First one from Drake himself.
Oh, okay.
So you talked a lot about prescription for athletic trainers, 20 minutes on the bike, be more prescriptive, reporting heart rate intensity. But what have you done to be more precise in your prescription with the nutrition department? Is that something that you've had an input in?
Well, yeah. I mean, in fact, we're talking about it right now, right? So, for instance, you're talking about return to play prescription for nutrition versus just healthy athletes and so and so. Yeah,
absolutely. Just been more prescriptive on that front rather than just, we're feeding them well, or it's going okay. Like actually numbers and data on that prescription.
Well, we don't. I mean, as far as documentation, we have it, but I mean the data on calorie burns and all that. No, I mean, so right now, for instance, we're talking about, let's say, well, soccer is a perfect example. I mean, I can give them as much conditioning as possible right now, but that doesn't add up to the near caloric output they're going to have when they have a full-blown lifting program and a hour and a half, 2-hour practice, right? So he's gone in now and talked to each team individually and said, okay, this is where I think you'll be. So we're really lucky. We've had a guy who went to John Moores University to study there, and he was a former cyclist. What's that?
Not far from me.
Not far, and you know who's running nutrition there. I mean, that guy's a legend, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So lucky to have Connor Spencer, who is our nutritionist, and fortunately for us too. Again, so here's a kid who was a cyclist. So when you talk about cyclists and endurance athletes, I mean, those are probably the best nutritionists you can find most often. So he's the guy that's going to come in and start figuring out the dial up, dial down stuff. In terms of actual data, calories, and I mean, other than body weight and knowing what we're recording as meals, so we have almost kind of luck in a way that we don't have a big enough room and a big enough budget to just give plates and plates of food and lunches and dinners. We're handing out either pre or post fueling. Some teams can pay for more if they have it in their budget, like say soccer likes to have breakfast. Well, here's an example. For soccer, for instance, they have an early practice in the morning, and we came to the conclusion that they need to have breakfast. Some kids aren't eating breakfast. We just know that, right? So what we did was we said, well, we have a center out there by the soccer field. We have a satellite center athletic training room. So we made breakfast for them out there. They were not allowed to practice unless they ate breakfast. So just that alone, without any data around that, I don't think anybody would argue that that's not a great idea. So of course, if we have somebody with an ACL or a lower body, what we would consider long-term injury, he would pop into that. He's getting the reports too from the coaches as he meets with them, getting individual sit downs with those athletes and discussing essentially caloric tailoring, I imagine.
Sweet. So just diving into the Q&A. So we've got Daryl Chambers first up. The first half of your presentation, and just diving into the structural organizational side. How do you propose for other collegiate institutions to adopt your organizational framework? How is this advocated?
I'm hoping at some point, and I talked to Pat about this too, I'm hoping at some point that everybody kind of crafts the message. There's plenty of information out there. That article that I referenced earlier, I'll put it up right now again. Let's see if I can find it now. That's the one you want to go to. It's that one right there.
Yeah. At
the bottom of the quote. That's the article you want to go to. And he's got a second one coming out. He texted me the other day as we were talking. But I'm hoping at some point, Rob, that somebody brings this format. I've also written something on Simply Faster about it, and brings it to their athletic director, because really this has got to come from them. I mean, again, I'm not naive enough to think that only a small, special, unique group of folks could hold this position. I don't believe that at all. I think it should be everywhere. But what I do think is, without the leadership of the athletic director, like what he or she says is what I'm saying. It's got to be like that. Then we're just another person. And so there's plenty of places to develop that. I don't think the outline and the schematic of these positions are just outrageous. The management of it is important. The leadership of it is important. But again, as good as a manager and leader I could be, I'm still only as good as the athletic director.
So along them same lines, how do you convince admin this model is more productive than medical staff leading the way?
Well, I mean, look, again, if you look at who's qualified best for it, when you look at the medical model, I'm not sure that's worked anywhere yet either. So, I mean, I think that medical model is, to me, a way to just say, we're just going to blanket it all. So my question is, when we look at the models that have been there before, some of these things that we've seen, and I know it happened in football, but so listen, this thing is not just going to alleviate catastrophic injury. What it's going to alleviate is bad training, bad quality, a bad delivery system, so that these kids don't get their best experience collegiately, right? So it's also that too. So we've got to make sure that people are involved and understand the whole thing, right? The other part of that is senior associate athletic directors or people who have oversight over our spots. I mean, we can ask people right now, how many times is the people that cover your area, the senior associate athletic director covering your area, come down to your room and watched full workouts, watched the training room and work for an hour, watched a full practice session and documented what's there? I'm going to guess probably a rare few, right? So I'm there on the field. I'm there in the training room. I honestly just walk and walk and walk almost all day long. It's an endless amount of work going on in there. And so that's the other part that's helpful. Can the medical model work? Is a physician going to come in there all day long and watch that? I don't think that's possible. They have jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my main concern. And when they say, oh, well, we're just going to allow those people to do their job. Well, that's been the problem in the beginning, that the supervision at the highest level has not been good enough, And again, I'm not dismissing the culpability of some of these practitioners that have been involved in some very uncomfortable situations. My question is, who was on top of that? Who did the hiring there? Who was doing the supervision there? Who was having the weekly meetings and the eye-to-eye contact with these practices that were happening? That's what has to be happening. I think the medical model is a way to kind of just say, oh, we have physicians involved. Okay. I don't find that as effective in my opinion.
So is there anywhere around the world that are doing this particularly well in terms of like actual examples, or even at home for you in the US?
I don't know all of them. I don't know, I thought maybe that the Toronto Blue Jays did a good job. I thought that maybe they had too many people there, but I know I've talked to Clyde Brewer a bunch about it. He thought it went well. I can't imagine Pat Ivy's situation not being well run. I haven't talked to Eric, and I haven't talked to a lot of people. There's a few others in collegiately that are happening. But I think, the sad part of this, you only hear about the models that aren't any good. Mm. And I think in those models, it's just the structure, the expectation, the ambiguity of the jobs just don't lead to a good space. And that's when you hear the grumbling of the athletes. When that happens, that never gets better.
Just diving back to the Q&A, what do you think was your biggest mistake that you made coming into director of high performance role with a new school or organization? Any advice for someone who's going through that same thing?
Well, I thought I was paying attention to the sensitivity of this, but it was clear that I hadn't done the best job possible in that area. So I would say, go not on the down low, but the real down low, which my wife will tell you is not a real big trait of mine. So I like to say it's my folksy charm. The amount of disagreement on that quote is probably overwhelming, but I would do that. I'm better at it now. Things have died down now too a little bit where, you've got to gain trust of these folks. So at the same time, in my mind, I've got to show an amount of knowledge in all these areas that I have so that these people understand. And at some point, a couple of folks said, finally, I've got somebody who's supervising me that actually knows what I do. I can't think of a better compliment than that. And the people that we have in place in those spots, my director of sports medicine, Steve Breck, Ashley Sampson in sports psychology. We have yet to hire a director of athletic performance, but Connor Spencer, nutrition, fantastic. I couldn't ask for a better group, and we're going to get better. That's the thing. And I showed earlier that this thing is still evolving. It's going to even get better, and I think it's really good right now.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that having a smaller S&C staff presents some challenges for the high performance model. What are some of them challenges, and how do you look to overcome them?
Well, I don't know that you overcome them. I think you just have to work around them. We have two
Yeah.
full-time staff. We'll have a director and then we'll have an assistant, right? Fortunately, we've had up to 8 to 10 interns, up to 3 to 5 of them certified CSCS. So we could actually use, although I don't feel good about leaving one of them in there and not having 2 full-times. So you can imagine what it's like, Rob, when one of the strength coaches leaves the room, your staff is now reduced by 50%. So you gotta be, you gotta, so I've been kind of the swing man in there, and I don't mind it. At some point, I've got to try to move away. I thought that was brought up earlier, like, what's it like moving yourself away? Frankly, I think it's time for me to do that because, if I had 5 teams of 20 kids, I feel like I could have a huge impact on those 100 athletes. But if I can coach the coaches and lead those other departments to be better, I can affect all 350. And none of us really have that opportunity. So at some point I'll do that. But right now, I think, again, it's almost like, your expectations are based on resources. So here again, every coach on our campus understands that there can't be a strength and conditioning coach warming their team up every single time. They can't travel with them every single time. And it's the same thing in athletic training, right? We have, so we have 8, 13, 14 athletic trainers, I think now, but I think 4 or 5 of them are certified, but they're graduate students, which will change in 2021, I believe, because the requirement will change there. But then again, so then you have them that are bouncing back and forth and contributing inside the training room. So they every single weightlifting session, right? They're at every practice, but perhaps not in every system. So again, you just try to, you have to kind of move the pieces where you think they fit the most and the best. And at the same time, that again, it doesn't mean that it's not important to have good supervision. It is. So that means that at some point, you're going to have to teach teams to warm themselves up and make sure you supervise those warm-ups, right? And make sure they're there so you feel confident, as an example.
Mm-hmm. An interesting one here, which I'm guessing will be on a lot of people's minds. Advice for up-and-coming strength coaches that have a goal to become an associate director, such as yourself. Any advice for them?
But hey, I'll tell you what. I hope your plan works better than me, and you don't have to wait till you're 52, right? I'm hoping that's what that's honestly my hope. And I think I got derailed a little bit earlier because I got off on a tangent. I know I did for sure because I don't think I directly answered your question. But I'm hoping people figure it out like it. And I think it does take a 15 to 20 year span to really get a good grip on how all those pieces work together. To know what it's like when you're a parent, knowing what you would do and not do, right? Because of how your parents raised and how you watch other people do it. I think it does take an experienced practitioner, an experienced athletic trainer, whoever that, exercise, many sports nutritionists who I like are PhD physiology. I think they would be good in those roles, right? But I think you need to be around in team settings, not in private institutions, that's another thing I think people get looking at, like, well, this person came from the private sector. How would they handle these 19 head coaches and the 30-something assistants come with them? It's a different thing. But I would hope that they would say early on, I would have a greater impact there. If it's impact you're looking for, if it's looking for that change in the welfare and performance delivery system, right? Getting the best possible product for that kid. I like to see guys popping in at 40 and 45 and getting it done in there during those times, right? And as far as I'm concerned, I was going to allude to earlier before my thought trailed off into something else was get that job description together, get the model together, get PowerPoint together, go to your athletic director and say, this is what I think will make us work way better. It's going to cover us in liability. I mean, who wouldn't do this now, right? The places that have had some problems, they have something like this in place now, right? Where they got somebody monitoring this. I want them to go to the athletic director and say, this is what I think will work. And when they say, gee, I'm not so sure that's going to work, I want them to say, well, Northridge is doing it. Call Bob Alejo. Mm-hmm. Call their athletic director. That's what I hope will happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. There's a few more questions that we haven't covered, but are you happy to put your details back on the screen so people can get in touch and drop messages and whatnot?
Here we go.
Perfect. So if anyone wants to follow up, get in touch with Bob via email or via Twitter. So thank you very much, Bob. Do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rob. Great seeing you.
Likewise. Thanks, mate. Do we have Joey ready to rock and roll? Oh, just unmute your mic, mate, please.
Can you hear me?
There we go. We're on.
So I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna pull my screen up and we'll get rocking.
That's all right. Perfect. We've got you. So what I'll do, I'll clear all the questions in the Q&A. So if anyone has got any questions for Joey, pop them in the Q&A, but not the chat. So over to you.
I appreciate you, Rob. I'm Joey Gracio. I'm the director at FAU. I oversee development of football, strength and conditioning, and performance. Today, we're going to talk about use of undulation and training qualities to fight a combination of maladaptation. So a really long title right there. A lot of big words, but essentially we're just going to talk about the why, when, how, on how we drive athletic performance, right? You heard it from Cam Josh earlier today. Every time I get on the phone with Johnny Parker and I say that's a great idea, he always hits me with this line. It's I'm the creator of nothing and the borrower of everything. So again, a ton of people have contributed to how I developed my philosophy and how I've come up as a strength coach, either with direct communication with me or from afar. If I didn't put you up here, again, I'm sorry for that. But again, I just have to acknowledge everyone that's helped me kind of come to the model that I have and we implemented at FAU. All right, moving on, right? So the evaluation of the strength coach, right? So, 2020, the strength coach has definitely evolved, right? And like Coach Storm said earlier, we became the Swiss Army knife, right? So we're the culture builder, we're the disciplinary, the juice guy, toughness developer, the psychologist, especially in today's age with mental health illness issues, with a nutritionist. We don't have a nutritionist at FAU, so we had to take that over. All right. But I'm going to pose this question. Are we keeping the main thing the main thing? All right. Are we keeping the main thing the main thing? I think a lot of coaches, they lean more on the art side versus the science side nowadays where, are we driving? Again, we have to ask this question. Do you as a coach systematically drive athletic qualities that enhance sports performance, right? We could still get buy-in. We could still develop toughness. We could still have that accountability and that attention to detail. But are you driving those qualities that are going to make them a better athlete in whatever sport that they play? And again, so for me, what does that look like? I want to simplify it, right? I want the 10,000 foot view, right? What do good athletes have? And what made Forrest Gump an All-American, right? As funny as that is. And it's, you look at all of these qualities and all the scientific literature, and it's really 5 things. It's speed, it's balance, it's power, it's strength, and it's the ability to repeat any of those other qualities over and over and over again, right? So are we developing these, right? Because this is very important to understand and very important that we're testing these to see that we're progressing and driving performance long-term, all right? So what is a strength coach, right? And again, we're going to get into the why first. And the strength coach are managers of stress and recovery, bottom line, right? So at the end of the day, we're looking to apply a stimulus that's going to elect a specific stress to the body, and then we're provide a recovery window for that body to turn around and adapt to the stress that we previously have given it, right? So I am no expert, I am no physiologist, and I am no neurologist. So again, I'm gonna let some of the experts speak for me. We go back all the way, I believe it's, I don't want to put a date on it because I don't know off the top of my head, but you look at George Selvey and the introduction of the gas, the general adaptation syndrome model, right? And we apply, again, a stress, your body has time to recover from it, and then essentially you get a super compensation or you're above your previous prepared level that you previously were, right? What does this mean and how does it affect training, right? So again, because he did this just in general stress. So physical training is required to enhance physical capacities. Adequate periods of recovery are required in order for sufficient regeneration to occur. So again, a stress is applied and then you need a specific sufficient regeneration period to occur. Again, Bruce Snyder, who has probably one of the most influence on me is from a programming standpoint. That's actually me sitting in the front row right there with the No Days Off shirt, back to my old Miss days. Me and Paul Jackson, we had the pleasure of hearing him speak. And he advocated and made this an extreme of importance. The balance between work and rest is the most fundamental critical training variable there is, okay? Again, another extremely successful practitioner in our field, Derek Hansen, right? And this is something that I took off his website. So cumulative effect of well-timed stress allows us to adapt and improve over time, right? So again, that's the idea, is we continually get better, and we apply this over time so that, again, we can increase all these athletic abilities. All right, more science, right? The fitness fatigue model, and I'm gonna read the paraphrase version. This implies that strategies that maximize fitness and minimize fatigue will have the greatest potential, okay, to optimize athletes' preparedness. Okay, so again, we're trying to give a stress and then allow this fatigue to subside and for us to adapt to this stress. All right. Right. And then again, is stress created equal, right? So, you know, we get to ask this question, right? We're talking about stress. Stress is not created equal, right? Specific stimuli will have different fatigue responses. Okay. You know, all stress is not created equal, continued. So again, the fitness, so I'm gonna paraphrase it. So implying that the after effects of fitness and fatigue are exercise specific. All right. So again, they're stress, a specific stress, a specific exercise, a specific velocity is going to have a different adaptation and a different stimulus to the body, all right, versus thinking that, okay, it's just all one thing. And again, you can pose the question is this: is tired is tired, correct? No, that's not correct, right? We all know from the previous slides that it's not correct. All right, so moving into fatigue, all right, because if we understand, all right, stress is important, okay, we have to elect stress, but now how do we, what does that fatigue mean? What are the recovery periods for these? And we have to understand this, okay? So again, what's the definition of fatigue? And it's one's ability to maintain the desired intensity or the body's ability to replenish energy stored for a given rate of work, all right? And we're gonna dumb it down and just break it into two specific departments that we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about central fatigue versus peripheral fatigue, all right? So again, I am no neurologist and I am no physiologist, so I'm going to make this as dumb as possible because this is how I understand it. All right, central fatigue starts with the brain, moves down into the spinal cord, into the motor neuron, okay? And then from there, that's where that peripheral fatigue takes over. It goes to the muscle fiber and then into the muscle cell itself, all right? What is it? What is central fatigue, right? So central fatigue is essentially the body's ability for the brain to communicate with your muscles. All right, a decreased ability of the brain to communicate with the muscles. All right, so again, what does this look like? This looks like a lack of coordination. This looks like decreased force output. This looks like decreased rate of force output. All right, you know, what are some physical traits that you'll see? Is you'll see lack of sleep. You'll see moodiness. Okay, and then again, you'll see just a generally tired athlete. You know, and then again, the most important thing to take out of this is, again, what are the windows of recovery for this, right? So you look at it, and the minimal window is 48 to 72 hours. And, you know, Charles Poliquin always talked about, you know, if you did an extremely heavy deadlift session, it could take you up to 10 days to recover from a really neurally taxing workout, right? And then the peripheral fatigue, right? So again, more localized, more inside the muscle fibers itself. You talk about energy stores, you talk about glycogen replenishment, you talk about ATP stores, and again, because it's localized and because, again, there's less moving parts with this, you know, you can recover at a faster rate. So you're looking at anywhere from 12 to 24 hours of recovery based on, you know, proper volume and intensity, okay? And the take home on all this is very simple, is specific training methods have global effects, all right? And other training effects or other training methods are more local in nature, all right? So again, advocating towards central or neural training is going to have the biggest effect on the human body, period, bottom line, all right? So we have to take priority in planning for it, okay? Jaworski, again, hits on this where he states the central nervous system is of paramount importance in the exertion and development of muscular strength, all right? So again, all of those qualities, those athletic qualities that we've touched on earlier on are affected by the neural training and the central nervous system itself. So we have to make a priority in how we train. All right, so again, neural training. What are the take homes with again the performance benefits of neural training? So you got intramuscular coordination. All right, so basically you're maximizing your motor units to produce greater force per muscle fiber. All right, so I can produce greater amounts of force. And then you look at intermuscular coordination, and essentially all it is being more coordinated. All right, it's your muscles being able to talk to each other and work synergistically. Again, in a more coordinated, smooth pattern. Right, I've never seen an I've never seen a world-class thrower that looked uncoordinated in the circle, or Usain Bolt, who's the world record holder in the 100 meter. When you watch him, it looks like poetry in motion. Again, this is because he's extremely neurally trained, and again, his genetic factors that play into that too, give him a high ceiling. But again, more force output, more coordination. Why is coordination important, right? And Franz Bosch touched on this. And again, it plays right back into the metaphor of the thrower or of Usain Bolt. Is coordination at the high degree of mastery is the most performance limiting factor in almost all explosive sports, right? Again, you look at people that are extremely explosive or extremely successful in single explosive sports, right? They have the smoothness to them, right? They get defined as almost being, again, just extremely smooth. All right. How do we, and it boils down to this, we understand that central fatigue, taxing the nervous system, training the nervous system is important. How do we go about it? And it comes down to the right prescription, right? And this is this metaphor right here. And it's essentially, if I got a headache and I take 1 ibuprofen, the headache's not going to go away. But if I take 15 ibuprofen, I'll die. So again, it's figuring out what is the right dose, how much of that dose do I need, and then how to prescribe that dose, right? And how do we do that? And it boils down to this. It boils down to principle-based programming, okay? It boils down to principle-based programming, leaning on the science aspect of this field and getting these principles, right? And what do these principles revolve around? And essentially, principles revolve around variability, okay? They revolve around variability, all right? And I got this out of Paul Gamble's Comprehensive Strength and Conditioning book. And it's how you manipulate variables in training that's going to allow you to, again, get the right prescription necessary to drive athletic qualities, all right? And again, variability, I want to make this very clear. Variability does not mean random. It's not like we're playing bingo where you sit around and you have a whole bunch of numbers and you just pray to God that number gets called and you go. No, it's a plan. Again, it's a plan, and we'll get into how we plan that here at FAU. All right, and why is it important to have these training variables and to get the right prescriptions, right? Because we want to avoid maladaptation, right? We want to avoid negative training effects. We want to avoid overtraining or even in worst case scenarios, catastrophic injuries. Okay, we want to avoid accommodation. Okay, we want to avoid plateauing. We want progress to continue over periods of time. We don't want to stagnate. We don't want to have that athlete not get stronger. The worst thing in the world is having an athlete in his junior year and you've had him 3 years and he asks you, why haven't I gotten stronger or faster, right? We want to continually drive this. And the only way to drive to avoid the accommodation and drive performance is to, again, constantly drive these performance metrics, right? We want to avoid the point of diminishing return, right? As you get closer, and I got this from the book Lynchpin, which is a phenomenal book. But essentially, we want to avoid, we could get as close to perfect as possible, right? So say you get to this night, it takes you 3 years to get to 98%, almost perfect, right? Well, it's going to take you another 3 years to get that extra 2%. So again, are we spending too much time in specific areas when there's other areas of necessity that need to be addressed? All right, so again, and this is going to help through, again, the training variabilities and using practical or principle-based programming, okay? And we've all heard it, football coaches say it all the time. I got an argument with a coach, I'm not going to say who it is, but about the 40-yard dash. I said, why do you like it? And he said, because we've always done it this way, right? And if you do the same program continuous over a period of time, negative training adaptations won't occur. And that's the bottom line. Performance increases they'll be non-existent, all right? And then you'll have a whole bunch of athletes asking why I'm not getting better. And the easiest way to have an athlete buy in is for them to see continued progress. Okay, so I pose this question, all right? Are you training what you think you're training? Okay, all right, and it boils down to this. If you try to chase 2 rabbits, you catch none, all right? So are you consolidating stresses? Are you like a sniper, and do you have a plan for the day, the week, the month, the year? And are you consolidating these stressors and then applying the appropriate stress to get those adaptations that you're chasing, all right? And then are you testing to make sure that they're continually progressing, all right? Again, one thing I want to touch on is don't be married to exercises. So before we get into like how we do things and all this, don't be married to exercises. Okay, don't be married to exercise. I see young coaches make this. I'm a young coach too, but I see other coaches make this mistake all the time. They write a program based around their favorite exercises instead of what we really should be doing is chasing adaptations. All right, chasing adaptations. Apply the stress to get the adaptation that you really want out of that training. Okay, right. And at the end of the day, we all abide by this specific rule, which is again the SAD principle: specific adaptation imposed demand. Just like we stated earlier through research, is that there's specific stimuli that elect specific adaptations. All right. So again, if you say you're a speed power program, do you have the adequate reps and sets and intensities dictated to elect those responses, right? If you say, oh, we're just going to hang our hat on being extremely strong and being in really good shape, are you have the appropriate volume? Do you have the appropriate intensities? Are you matching what you say you're training? Okay, and that's the biggest thing, right? And how do we do this, all right? And you hear people go and have thousands of different methods and all this and ideas about periodization. But to me, periodization basically is just, it's the study of planning, you know, and I really like this definition that I found from Comfort and Turner, and a training plan whereby peak performance is brought about through the potentiation of biomotor abilities and the management of fatigue and accommodation. So again, you know, are your athletic qualities, is your training compatible? Is it complex? Are they building off of each other? Are specific athletic qualities driving other athletic qualities? Are you managing fatigue? Are you testing that you're managing fatigue? Are you avoiding accommodation? And I think these are all questions, you know, when we self-audit ourselves that are extremely important to ask, right? Let's not reinvent the wheel. You know, I talked to Al Vermeil last week, and you know, Bob, it's kind of funny that Bob said it, you know, because Al said it too on the phone, and he's like, you know, tell me what they call it now, and I'll tell you what we called it. You know, and it's this idea of, as we progress from off season to preseason, we're going to go from simple to complex. We're going to go from general to specific, right? And we're going to lean on, you know, these athletic qualities that we deem extremely important, whatever you call them, as far as your KPIs for whatever sport. But at the end of the day, you know, can you build work capacity, right? Because if you don't have work capacity and your athletes can't withstand your workouts, they're not going to adapt and thrive, right? Can we build up a foundational level of strength, right? Relative body strength, or just absolute strength, right? Are we powerful? Okay, show me a sport that doesn't involve power and where power is not important, right? Can we be bouncy, right? Do we have bouncy athletes? And then again, the speed, which is, you know, again, to me is number one on my pyramid and number one on Al Vermeil's pyramid. Like, can we outrun people? You know, can our big guys be fast? Can our small guys be fast? If you got, you know, court athletes, right? You know, one thing that's impressive about LeBron James is he's extremely fast for how big he is, right? So again, speed. Can you increase your speed? Right? And how do we go about this, right? Yeah, and you know, we use a undulated model, all right? And it's a fancy way of saying we use a smooth up and down. You know, the definition of it is move or go with a smooth up and down motion. But essentially, all it is training volume and intensities are varied each workout, each week, and each month. Again, and making the stress of the body consistently varied so that we can plan in those recovery periods, and then we also can potentiate further workouts down the week, down the weeks, or down the day, from day to day, from week to week, from month to month. All right, and again, you can see that wave-like pattern. You know, and again, what does it also allow us to do? You know, this method it allows us to again train multiple athletic qualities at one time while emphasizing one or two, but we're able to train other qualities. Why is this significant? Because again, it provides us with the ability for us to not detrain other abilities that we've driven and taken the time to drive, right? And you know, it goes along with what Charlie Francis had a ton of success with, which is this vertical integration model. Again, so we're going to train work capacity, strength, explosive strength, reactive strength, and speed all the way throughout the training year. But we're going to vary the amount of volume prescribed to those qualities as we deem whatever the emphasis of our month is, okay? And again, it helps us build in recovery. It helps us build in recovery, and it essentially eliminates overtraining and plateaus, right? And what you can see here is I got this gigantic graph and breakdown of my mesocycle and how I prescribe my reps, which we'll get into right here. But we're going to talk about how we undulate our mesocycle, right? So I'm going to give you the example. Our emphasis in this mesocycle was strength and explosive strength. Okay. So again, I'll get into lifting, right? So my maximum volume for rep prescription would be 1,000 reps. Okay. I use a bastardized version of what you see in the system. I count reps on all my main exercises, and I start counting at above 60%. All right. So again, so the maximum amount I use was 1,000. All right. Because again, this is a earlier block. I'm only going to use 80%. All right. That's a typo right there, but I'm only using 80% of my maximum volume. All right. So again, how do I break that up to get this wave-like pattern, right? So again, I want my high weeks to be high. So again, you see the first week, we're at 85%, we're at 240 reps. All right, we're at 30% of my maximum volume, okay, 30% of my maximum volume for that entire month. Moving into week 2, okay, it's a low week, all right? We're at 70%, we're at 35% of our total volume, which is 280 reps, okay? So again, we're still able to drive strength and we're still able to work. It is not a deload, but essentially because of the decrease in intensity, okay, we're again, it's not as taxing neurally as the first week is. And you move into week 3, and you can see again this inverse relationship between intensity and volume. Week 3, we get into there and we're working again at 90% at 200 total reps, okay, and that's 25% of our volume. And then what we get into is our deload on week 4, okay, and something I took away from Coach Jackson when I was with him, and then Bruce Schexnayder kind of just reinforced both of our philosophies on it, is that on deload weeks we don't back away from intensity, right? We know, and everyone's been putting up the residual effect chart because we're all trying to scare our kids into running and doing all these things during this quarantine period. But we also know that it takes an extremely long time to drive speed and power. And then the residual effect for speed is 5 days plus or minus 3 before you start to see a decrement in that speed, right? So again, the idea is I want to give them just a taste of that neural stimulus, specifically in the weight room, to make sure that we don't detrain in that specific ability, all right? But the volume is minimal, okay? And then disclaimer, with all of these reps and numbers, I want to be as close to them as possible, but I'm not going to kill myself if I'm 10 off or 15 off. I just want to be in the ballpark of these figures. All right. So again, and then you can see in the chart, the undulation, the wave-like pattern of the intensity and then of the volume, and then the inverse relationship between the intensity and the volume as you go through these 4 weeks. Moving on. All right. And this graph came from Ken Clark and Peter Wayans, their research, and I thought it was phenomenal. And they essentially what they did was they turned around and analyzed everyone that ran at the combine. And what they found is that they all reach specific velocities at almost similar rates. Okay, so for us, why was this important? Because they essentially put a percentage on their velocity. So for me, my idea with this was, and I don't know, it just simplifies it for me, and it's the way I do it, is essentially to prescribe an intensity for sprinting. Okay, I use 100% of their maximum velocity as it would be related to as 100% of the 1 rep max on the squat. All right, and then I prescribe the adequate distance to match whatever intensity that I have planned for that week. So again, my top mile per hour achieved equals 100% of my average my top mile per hour achieved at 30 yards. And what we found just from practical experience, and then obviously this chart reinforced it, is majority of our athletes reach top speed at 30 yards. So again, if that's my 100, I'm looking at anything above 30 yards is probably super maximal, okay, versus anything under 30 yards is going to be sub-maximal in just for total velocity, okay? And how is this applicable, right? So how do I apply this? Okay, so again, we apply distances, all right, that correlate to that percentage. So if I'm at 85 intensity, just like I was with lifting, because I want to consolidate my stresses and I want to match the training theme of the month, okay? If I'm at 85%, we're going to be at a distance of 15 yards because that, again, correlates to 85% of my maximum velocity is obtained at 15 yards, all right? So again, and then I'm going to have the adequate volume. So I'm applying 30% of my total sprint volume. I'll never go over 2,000 yards in a mesocycle, 4-week block on sprint work. And then I'll never go over 600 yards in a microcycle for sprint work, right? Those are just kind of like my guidelines. So we're using 80%. We have 1,600 yards in this block. all right? And we're applying 30% of that total 1,600 in this first week at an intensity of 85. So majority of the velocity distances we'll be working at is 15 yards. Second week, again, we increased the yardage, and there's that inverse relationship, and we're at 10 yards at 560 yards. And you see week 3, we move it to 20 yards, okay? So again, we're at probably approximately 90% intensity or 90% of our top speed, and we're applying 400 yards. And then again, week 4, because there's such a decrease in our intent, or excuse me, in our volume, I'm able to go up to 95%. And then as we move through the training year, again, those intensities increase, but you can see the average distance over that first 4 weeks. First 4 weeks is 17.5, and our average intensity is 87.5. So again, matching that idea of explosive strength and absolute strength, right? I'm able to apply more volume in the weight room because our speed work is at these specific distances and at this specific volume, right? I stole this chart from Flanagan. It was out of a push article, a push band article, and I thought this was excellent. But again, how do I gauge intensities, apply metrics? And I use Mike Young's mechanical model, which I had the ability actually, when Boo spoke, Mike Young spoke on this topic specifically on how to gauge intensity of plyometrics, and it's impact velocity, collision time, and distribution of loaded impact. So basically, how fast are you going? How jarring is it? And then essentially, is it one leg or two leg, right? So again, to me, in my mind, I classify these exercises as far as from an intensity standpoint as like, okay, like a consecutive single leg bound is probably 100%. A single leg depth jump, super maximal to your vertical jump would be probably, again, super maximal above 100%. So again, that's how we prescribe that intensity. And it's important because, again, we're trying to consolidate stressors. We're trying to consolidate stressors. So we look at it, right, and you see week 1, right? So we're not going to go above 200 jumps in a mesocycle. All right, that's just my rule of thumb from practical experience and the athletes I've worked with. We're going to use 80% of that. So we have 160 total jumps distributed over 4 weeks. All right, so what does that look like? So week 1, again, 30%. All right, we're going to get 48 touches at an intensity of 85. So again, if the intensity is 85, I have to make sure my exercise catalog matches that 85%. So for me, that's bilateral consecutive jumps. Okay, and again, I want to make sure that Matt did a phenomenal job touching on in his presentation last night is we want to make sure it's vector specific. Okay, that is vector specific. That if we're working acceleration on Monday, that is more horizontal in nature, and if we're working more maximum velocity work on Thursday, that is more vertical in nature. Okay, so again, vector specific is extremely important. So again, my exercise selection is going to be, and my catalog is going to come from bilateral consecutive jumps, right? I get into the next week where I drop the intensity down to 80, and we're going bilateral jumps, okay, and they're non-consecutive, all right? They're non-consecutive. We're going to get 56 touches. I'm allowed to get more touches because, again, the intensity and the volume, that inverse relationship that occurs with it. Then the next following week, we're going to get 40 touches, all right? We're going to get 40 touches, and we're going to be at an intensity of 90%. So using this 90%, my exercise catalog for 90%, we're going to get into bounds, we're going to get into depth jumps. Okay, so again, bounds, alternating bounds, and then, bilateral depth jumps. And then week 4, we usually test either a broad jump or a 3 broad to make sure that, those are kind of like our benchmarks to make sure that, again, we're continually progressing. But then you can see, again, we talk about consolidating stresses and making our high weeks be high and our low weeks be low. But we're averaging an intensity of 87.5% over 4 weeks, similar to what we did on our speed work, similar to what we did on our lifting, okay? And then you get into conditioning, and again, conditioning is support to me, all right? So, I follow the old adage, and we'll get into that chart, but we're going to be under 70% of our maximum velocity when we condition. We're going to abide by the work to rest ratios that are shown in the sport, whatever sport it may be. Okay, I'll never go over 12,000 yards in a mesocycle. Okay, and then you see we're using 80% of that. All right, and then we distribute this over 2 days. Okay, so again, in the first week we got 30% distribution, so we got approximately 2,800 yards. The second week, 35. We're approximately 3,400 yards, and then 2,400 yards, and then essentially 1,000 on the deload week, allowing that body to recover. All right, so moving on into our microcycles. And again, if I look at it like this: is I steal and borrow from all these extremely smart coaches because they've spent the time to figure out pros and cons of all of these different training modalities. Why should I change what they've made extremely important and extremely successful, right? So again, I look at Charlie Francis, and we integrate his high-low integration model, and why do we do that? Because again, just like with our weeks, with our days, we want to make sure that they're compatible and they build off each other, that workouts potentiate each other as you move through that training week. Also, we want to build in fatigue management into the schedule, right? We want our high days to be extremely high, right? Something that Tim Karen that spoke on recently with us when he did a staff education was, he wants to maximize his ROI, which is his return on investment. Make those high days high, right? Because we know that, we all like to say, oh, effective minimal dose and all this stuff. Coaches don't care about effective minimal dose, right? They're gonna put high amounts of stress on these athletes no matter what. So again, let's make sure that our high days are high and our low days are low, so we can get those right adaptation and recovery windows built in, right? And again, consolidating stress, and this is a quote from Boo, and it's kind of comical, but it's funny. Is that he said, I drink water to hydrate, and I drink whiskey to get drunk. And again, it's this idea of staying out of this middle zone, this murky zone where, again, is it a strong enough stress to elect the response you want? Is it a neural stress that is it going to drive that adaptation, or is it, barely a neural stress and it's going to affect your recovery for the upcoming days, right? And then what does it look like? Okay, so again, this undulated micro. So again, you saw how we broke down our weeks. So this is a week 1 right here. So we're at average intensity at 85%. Okay, for our main exercises, and then for all of our sprinting and plyometric work. All right. So then how is it broken down? Okay, so Monday, something I stole from Coach Jackson. He started calling, instead of calling it high-low, he started calling it performance support days. And that's just something that, when you use this verbiage with athletes, I think it was extremely effective for them to understand what the purpose of the day was. And it kind of locked them into what we were doing. So you can see performance days. Okay, so Monday being more accelerative in nature. Okay, more accelerative in nature. And Thursday being more maximum velocity in nature / I would say rate of force development, starting strength in that specific day. All right, so you can see again how we break it up. So again, Thursday is my highest day in the week, and that comes from trial and error. We used to make Monday our highest day, and it was this idea, hey, guess what? They're coming off the weekend and they're going to be fresh. They got 2 days. A lot of guys, they came in and they got extra work on Saturday and recovery and all this. But we all know, we started testing throughout the summer, and, we tested on Monday, and, our numbers were they weren't what you thought they were going to be. So I'm like, wow, we're going to do really good this Monday. And then, you come to find out that there was a really big party on Saturday, and then there was a really, really good party at a pool on Sunday, and they come in on Monday and just kind of, they ain't putting out like the way you want them to. So what we did was we switched that Monday and that Thursday. We made Thursday that highest stress, allowing them to get into a rhythm in the week, allowing them to again, get into that training rhythm, get the proper hydration and nutrients and supplements, and kind of get back into that mind frame of, okay, this is a work week. And that's when we started testing on Thursday. And that's when we made Thursday our high day. But Monday being accelerative in nature, okay? So again, you can see we got resisted sprints, 15-yard sprints to match what we were talking about previously in what the emphasis of the week and the month was. All right, we got a trap bar complex, all right, which again is accelerative in nature. We'll do full cleans from the ground. So again, the exercise sequence, again, it goes from fast and essentially fast and light to moderate and fast to heavy. And again, we're trying to drive intent and speed even on our strength lifts. So again, I say moderate, moderately fast, and then high intensity and demanding. And then you can see we fill in the cracks with some auxiliary work that we feel is specific to the sport or specific to the population of athlete that we work with. Then you move into our support day on Tuesday. All right. And again, I told you, we abide by the demands of the sport. So again, we're doing 30-yard shuttles, which is 5 back, 10 back. We're doing 1,100 yards of that. Because again, this is, Friday is going to be the harder conditioning day. And then you get into, Tuesday's lift, and we talk about, all right, what does this look like? And again, it's primarily upper body, and it really is only upper body. And the neural stimulus outside of bench is essentially not much. Okay, it's not much. We train a collision sport, so we got to have some body armor. So there has to be some functional hypertrophy, and there has to be, again, some of those upper body muscles have to be strong, especially as you get closer to the ball in football, right? And then you get into Thursday, like we talked about. So resisted sprint, in this first week block, and that could be changed out for some maximum velocity mechanic drills, such as, wickets. And then you got your 15-yard sprints where we time them, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But then again, you talk about faster movement. So again, you got power clean at a lower intensity. You got split jerk, which is an extremely high velocity movement, right? So working more of that speed strength versus, that accelerated strength. And then you got squat at a higher, at a specific volume, right? 30% of the entire day's volume is dedicated to squat and deadlift. So again, you can see that the emphasis on that day is going to be the power and that absolute strength development. And then again, we filled in the cracks with accessory exercises that we think are going to help that population of athlete or specific to the sport. And then that Friday, again, repeat sprints, because to me, repeat sprintability is one of the main indicators of success in football. So we want to get them into it early on and build off it and build up their volume tolerance as we progress through the annual year. And then you get into their upper body workout Friday after their run, and essentially it's very, by that point in time, they're waxed, they're taxed, they're hurting. So again, we can't make that Friday workout crazy because they really just don't have much in the tank, right? So again, how do we classify these exercises? And essentially, we look at motor unit involvement, right? So the more motor unit involvement, the more neural it's going to be. So anything that is heavy and fast, multi-joint, and high levels of coordination are going to be higher up on that scale of motor unit and recruitment, and then they're going to be more neurally taxing, versus isolated exercises or upper body exercises. They're going to be more on the other scale of peripheral, right? And I know this is not an exact chart, but it is a good baseline, because you could argue like a deadlift has higher more motor unit. I know guys are going to argue a bench press has more motor unit recruitment. I get that, but again, it's just a good guide, and all this is just a good guide, because you have to adapt it to whatever you do. All right. So again, moving on, classification, exercise central versus peripheral. So you can see as the velocities increase or the distance increases, specifically as it's for sprints or for your plyometric exercises, the neural demand gets higher and higher and higher, right? So as soon as you start chaining together jumps, as soon as you start getting past that 20 to 30 yard mark into flying tens, as soon as you start getting into bounds at 40 yards, you're going to see a high neural demand, okay, an extremely high neural demand, right? So again, that's another way how we classify it. And then also how we also classify our running, right? It's driven by intent. So if we're at 95, and this is a little bit different than how I gauge and prescribe the running distances, right? We're looking at, if you time someone there in that 95 to 100% of that best time, then you have that neural intent to it. You're driving that adaptation you want, and you're going to have to prescribe, again, those appropriate rest times that go along with it. So again, like if I go out there and I run a 20 and it's 97% of my best, like I'm going to need a solid 72 hours to recover from that, right? Because again, I'm trying to give maximum intent to that right there. And we want to make sure, again, we have the right prescription of volume along with these intensities, because you can't increase volume and intensity at the same rate. You can't. There has to be this inverse relationship, or else you get maladaptation, and again, you get people overtraining and possibly getting hurt, right? Then you look at that medium zone is what we try to avoid, okay? Because again, it's just as taxing. It's just as taxing as being at that 90 to 95%, but at the same time, you're not getting the same stimulus and the same adaptation that you would if you were above that 90%. So again, that goes into, how do you elect in training the maximal, the highest level of intent? And, you do that through racing, you do that through timing things, you do that through measuring things, you do that through giving them objective feedback, you give that through how you coach and your mannerisms. So again, I think it's extremely important to stay out of that murky water, right? And make sure that you stay in those nice Bahamas beaches where you can see straight to the bottom again, and you consolidate those stresses, and you make sure you're hitting the target on what you think you are, right? And then obviously when low's low, I want it to be low. So again, it's below that 75%, and that's our conditioning, and it's restorative in nature. It's restorative in nature, and then also it's preparing them from a tissue stress capacity standpoint of the accumulated volume that they're going to experience in a work week for either camp or spring ball or spring baseball, whatever sport you play, right? And it's the beauty of it is the volume can be high because it's not really taxing, so that again, it's not going to affect the next outputs or the next performance day. You might be a little bit sore from it, but from a neural aspect, you'll still have high levels of force output and coordination after. All right. And again, you could also classify exercises by using the force velocity curve, right? You surf the curve, and you can see, a lot of people get wrapped up in specific intensity zones. I think velocity plays just as an important part in trying to figure out if something's neural or not, or neurally taxing as not, as just overall force and load. So again, you heard Coach Moffitt talk about it when he was saying that, majority of the time his guys squatted in between 50 and 60%. I think it was like something like 10,900 reps, and they still stayed strong. It's probably because the velocity of those lifts were extremely high. Again, that's a neural activity. So again, I think it was a good representation of why neural training is extremely important and why it should be prioritized. And then what are these guidelines? And it's, I'm not reinventing the wheel again. We're abiding by these proven methods that have been developed over 60 and 70 years. The Russians are really strong, and they're still strong, and they develop strong athletes year after year after year. So maybe we should listen to how they prescribe these again, and just give you a template or a guideline to help you so you don't get off course. And then another way to do it again is monitoring VBT. All right. So again, if I'm working, I know there's specific velocities for each zone. If I'm working accelerated strength, I want it to be 0.5 to 0.7. If I'm working speed strength, or I want it to be above 0.7 to 1. I mean, those aren't exact, but if you're in the ballpark, at least you have an idea of the emphasis you're training in. And what I like about VBT is, and I don't have the resources currently to have it here, but I had it at my previous employer. What I like about it is you can maximize training days. So again, if you're working absolute strength and a guy's smashing it and he's in 90% and he goes and hits it for 0.7, man, let's go up, man. Let's add weight. Let's maximize our training days. I only had 7 weeks before coronavirus hit to train my guys. Like, we don't have a lot of time, so let's maximize these training days. Okay. And then just some take-home messages as far as how I formulate and what questions I ask myself, and what points I make to myself as I do this, as I apply and prescribe in this program, is I want to maximize specific stresses on specific days to ensure adequate recovery windows, right? Because again, it boils back down to, are they recovering from what you're giving them? Okay, so again, if I go speed days 2 days in a row, the second day the force output and my velocity is going to decrease, and then again, it's going to take me, double the amount of time because I stack 2 of those workouts together to recover from them. All right, so again, can I apply the right stress on the right day at the right time, right? What modalities are going to give me the most return on investment, right? And that's where we have to look at and evaluate our population that we're training. All right, if you take over for a guy that was a HIIT program and they've never Olympic lifted, you still need to make them powerful. So maybe you need to look into different modalities, trap bar jumps, med ball tosses, all these different things. If you're an Olympic guy, like don't be married to exercises. Okay, be married to the adaptations that exercises provide. All right, and find the greatest return on investment. Intensity steers the boat. Again, intensity steers the boat, and that goes hand in hand with the intent. Are you at the right intensity that prescribes that is demanded to get that same stimulus that is going to make that body adapt, right? And then, if intensity steers the boat, volume keeps it afloat or it sinks it, So again, make sure you have the right volume to go along with whatever intensities you have prescribed and whatever goals and emphasis you have for that week. And do the days complement each other. You saw it, recovery is built into my weeks. And then recovery is built into essentially my week itself. And you have to have, again, that complementary training. You have to have that ability to recover from a hard performance day and give them, 72 hours before the next one. And then is there an end goal at the end of the training, right? Whether it be that day, that week, or that month. Like, are you hitting your target? Or again, or you have a shotgun and you're just buckshotting all over the place? Or are you a sniper and you're hitting your target? Right. And then what does it look like? Okay, what does it look like? So again, on the left side is our acceleration day. So again, you can see consecutive broad jumps, 4 sets of 5, so 20 reps. Again, the vector specific acceleration is more horizontal in nature. We threw in some run rockets. We're blessed to have that there at FAU. I love them. I think they're awesome. They really increase the efficiency of the resisted work that we've been doing. So again, run rockets, we do four sets of 15. And then, like I said, we're trying to drive intent. It's accelerated day. We're going to put them in different start variations, and we're going to make heats based off their previous time. So again, it's like almost like a track practice. I'll call heat one up. 15 guys will hop up, and they think they're the fastest of the group. And we call winners out. We call losers out. There's prizes for it. We have accountability teams. They get points for it. So we really incentivize winning, and we really harp on and make kids feel that when they lose, it's not, that's not it. Again, then we get in the kneeling starts. Again, I like, just a different start variation that is really going to emphasize the rhythm and timing of that first extension of their front leg, that first step. I'm not yet too much into the biomechanics of it because Matt did such a phenomenal job last night of doing it, and then Cam Josh hit on it again this morning. So, and then we get in a 3-point start because again, every kid wants to be the fastest kid. What do they want to do? They put us in 3-point, coach. Put us in 3 points. We go in 3 points. And then you look at Thursday. All right, more vertical emphasis. All right, we're going hurdle hops, 4 sets of 5. Again, get some maximum velocity mechanics work with the wicket drills. And the beauty of the wicket drills is you can control the intensity of the wicket drill essentially with the running, with how long the running is. So sometimes we do 5 yards if it's early in the training year. Sometimes we do 10. The idea is, again, the rhythm and coordination, again, that like Cam Josh hit upon, which is that front side mechanics, which is so important, not only just from a speed standpoint, just from an injury prevention standpoint, and that's something that has been used in reducing soft tissue injuries, even for our big guys. We look at how they jog around to and from practice, and it's really increased their running economy, which has been huge for us. And then again, we get them revved up with some races, and then we get some technique work, and we'll waterfall start those, and we'll coach them up, and then we'll get some time. We'll pull those timing gates out. We have 3 Brower laser timing gates, and we get after it. We see who the fastest guys are. And then, so again, moving down, getting into the lift. And again, the lift Monday being more accelerative in nature. So again, like that tri-bar complex. So working on some starting strength, some jumps in there, moving into cleans from the ground. Again, at 85%, you see we're 3x2 front squat. And again, we're driving intent on all these lifts. So again, just because you think, oh, it's going to be slow. No, like we drive intent. We're coaching aggression. We're coaching violence on every rep. I'm very fortunate to have 5 strength coaches in that room, including myself. We only have groups up to 25. So, I mean, I might only have 5 athletes. So we're coaching the hell out of these kids as far as from an intent, from getting that psychological advantage, getting them in the right mindset, and really driving that intent on all these strength exercises. So from a biomechanical standpoint, they should be on par. And then from a mental aspect of it, like we want them to attack these lifts. So again, you see with the speed skater squats, again, very similar biomechanically to the kneel and start, the sprinter bridge. And then you get into the Thursday, our performance day on Thursday, and we get power cleans. You see the lower intensity. So it's a higher speed. They're catching it in a power clean position versus a full squat. All right, because again, I'm stealing strength work, and I'm also cleaning up a lot of the catch positions with a full clean. I know a lot of people don't like full cleans. I love full cleans. I think it's really easy to go from a full clean to a power clean in your teaching progressions. I don't think it's the same as if you go from a power clean to a full clean. And then when we go to max day, everyone wants to drop anyway. And I think you could run at risk of getting injured. And then you get into some split jerks, and then some squats, 85%, 4x2, a ton of volume. Because again, it's a high day and it's a high week. And then you get into trap bar deadlift 4x5 at 85%. Again, extremely high neural stimulus. Then you get some side squats, which are more specific, I guess you could say. And then one leg RDLs, because again, we did some maximum velocity running. So biomechanically, it's similar. We always finish up with some ab work. All right. And then you get into, all right, what do our support days look like? All right. Our support days, again, we're going to mimic the stresses of the sport, and we're going to get them, my goal, and I stole this from Paul Jackson, full disclosure, my goal is to get them to adapt and thrive in practice. All right. Because you win games in practice. So, what is practice? What does Indy, the demands of Indy look like? What do the demands of team look like? And they're not what we think they are, right? So again, I want to try to match that as much as humanly possible in my conditioning, and I want to try to accumulate as much high-speed yardage in my conditioning, and in my week overall to match the stresses of a work week, right? So again, you see 30-yard shuttles, 5 back, 10 back, 2 sets of 16 reps, 40 seconds rest, 7 to 8, 7, 8, 9 are the times to make. All right, then you get into RSA on Friday, 2 sets of 15, 7 seconds of work. And then 45 seconds worth of rest. Some that I didn't touch upon when I was talking about my volumes and intensities in the overall week. So like everything's tapered. So my big guys, they don't run 50 yards, they run 30 yards. So again, essentially you could take 3/4 the amount of all of our total running and jumping volume, and that's what's applied to our big guys, right? Because they're 300 pounds. There's no reason in the world, and then some of the modalities change too. There's no reason in the world to put them through the same type of jumping and exercise like that. That's how you're asking for injuries. Is their inertia, their own body weight is an extreme stress to them as they jump and run, and they just move, right? And then you get into what does it look like, on our support low days in the weight room, and again bench. We use a lot of supersets, a lot of complex sets, just again to drive, and none of my workouts in the weight room are longer than 45 minutes. We're always driving tempo. I think it's a good way to build work capacity, specifically on these upper body days. So again, more restorative in nature. Charlie Francis touched on complex training all the time as a way to drive restorative processes. So again, but you can see, we usually pair a press with a row. And then I make sure that there's a balance between presses and rows, and then horizontal presses and vertical, planar too. So vertical versus horizontal. I try to make sure there's a good balance of that. And then you look at a lot of football players in general, or a lot of athletes in general nowadays, because how we sit, looking at the phone all the time, we're anterior dominant, So again, I try to throw in some extra posterior chain work, whether it be hamstring work, back work, whatever it is. We kill that upper back. I tell my guys all the time, it's like, you want to do extra work, come in and do 100 reps of back. Like you probably need it. You'll be all right for the next day, but you probably need it. And then you get into Friday, overhead press, which is one of my favorite exercises, just because of the coordination involved. And you pair that with a dumbbell row, and then you got dumbbell bench with pull-ups, so back machines like I was talking about. And then, every once in a while, you got to give the kids what they want, right? And they want triceps, biceps, and big traps. Again, I tell them all the time, it's V-neck season, because, I live in Florida, it's V-neck season year round. So, we have some fun with it, and, we give them what they want, and you get some more buy-in, and they feel good walking out of the weight room. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. And then, so again, how do we manage the stress to optimize recovery, right? So we talked about how we prescribe it. Well, how do we monitor it, right? So to me, training is testing, testing is training. Okay. If you don't have testing built in to your training, you're not training, you're guessing. Okay. And how does it look like, right? What does that look like? And for us, it's real simple. We got stress at the top. We break down our 2 stresses, and then we look at, again, we have the resources that have GPS data. So again, we look at maximum velocity, again, that maximum heart rate. We look at maximum heart rate. We look at our total high speed yardage, and we look at our total IMA, which is any movement forward, backward, or side to side above 3 meters per second, right? And then from a training aspect, we look at our depth jumps. If we had VBT here, we'd look at that. We're in the process of acquiring that. And then we look at rate of RPE, we look at RPE, and, we ask them on specific exercise on specific days, what the RPE of the exercise was. If you do a heavy squat session, I want to know about it. What it looked like. All right. And then from a peripheral standpoint, you get into, again, the GPS, you get into total yardage, total load, and then average heart rate. Okay. So how is their body responding to the mechanical stress? Like, what does the internal stress look like to the outside stress? Right. And then from a training standpoint, we look at vertical jump, we get their body weights, we look at hydration via body weight. We're not doing any specific gravity urine testing or anything like that. And then we give them wellness questionnaires for them to take home, and for them to give us input on where they feel, how their bodies feel. Right. And then how do we test, right? How does that break down in a week? Right. So Monday, when we're warming up for cleans or whatever, just like Coach Moffitt talked about earlier in his presentation, is we just send our guys over. We have 2 just jump mats. There's usually an intern running it. We have them go over there. They hit 2 vertical jumps, and they do 2 depth jumps, and they do it from a 12-inch box to make sure that it's standardized. What's funny is, like, the first week we did it, the jumps weren't great, and then we posted them and we put them everywhere, and we ranked everybody, and all of a sudden, we had a 5% increase. So it's funny how intent really drove that. And then Monday we also look at high speed yardage, and then we just look at the top mile per hour, top velocity. Moving into Tuesday, we just look at the total yardage. All right, and then we look at the IMA and the body weight. Thursday is very similar to Monday, all right, except that we have testing data on our sprints. So we look at those also, whether it be a flying 10 or a 20-yard sprint or a 15-yard sprint. We're always comparing those. And then on Friday, we're looking again at total yards, IMA, body weight, and then we also take a peek at their high-speed yardage, considering that's a repeat sprint day. We want to make sure that, again, we're saying what we're doing as far as from that. And then you can see this is over the 8 weeks that we had. And you can see, again, the undulation that you see, and then the buildup of it is the first 2 weeks were kind of stagnant. Third week, they crept up a little bit. And then that week that we backed off allowed them to recover. And you were seeing the same thing. And we actually got cut off on week 7. So that actually is just the same as week 4. I don't know why that's in there like that. But they were about to, you can see it almost mimics weeks 5 through 7. It almost mimics the undulation that we have from a volume standpoint, right? And then you look at depth jump, same thing, right? Week 3, they're kind of in the gutter. Training was getting them. They bounced back week 4, and then week 5, and then you can see week 6 and week 7 kind of falling in that same realm. Where again, we're probably going to come back up week 8, and then again, just some more charts. We're looking at right here. We're looking at velocity bands to make sure that we're hitting specific numbers as far as from a mile per hour standpoint in our speed sessions. And then you can see that top red one that's above 18 miles an hour. So as we progress through the weeks, it increased again. So as we increase the intensity of our sprint drills, the amount of average distance covered at over 18 miles an hour increased. And then the same thing right here, velocity bands versus speed session versus total yardage. So you can see again, what is our total yardage? One thing just from an injury prevention standpoint, we all try to match the total accumulated yardage, right? And what I found is if you get as close as possible to the total accumulated high speed yardage, right? Because when do guys get hurt? They don't get hurt jogging, they get hurt sprinting. So if you can at least get them equipped to handle from a high speed yardage, the total volume will be less of a burden as you get into camp and moving forward. And then you look at just total yards, period, from week to week, from day to day. And again, we're just trying to make sure that, we're saying what we're doing what we're saying. Like we're around in a ballpark range of what those volumes that we're prescribing are. And then again, weekly loads versus load density. Again, we want the density, even though our workouts are an hour, we want the density to be higher than a practice, right? Because then when they get into practice, the practice now duration might get them, but at least we know they can handle the intensity and density of the exercise or of the training session, right? I want to thank Matt. It's funny, things come full circle. Is me and Matt actually interned together, and I think it was 2012 at LSU. I think Matt was as green as they come. He just came off just out of college, and I just finished my GA, and we're both young, and so it's been awesome to see him climb the ranks as I climb the ranks. And again, I just want to thank him for allowing me to be part of this. And then anybody that was associated with this, as far as from a sponsor standpoint or a speaker, this is a serious matter we're dealing with. Obviously, we're all in it together. I mean, you hear that all the time, and I appreciate all y'all and all the donors, the donations that have came in. Any questions? And then that's my contact information right there.
Joey, fantastic, buddy. Thank you very much. So we've got quite a few questions that we're not going to get through, but so you're happy to people to drop you an email and
absolutely.
Social medias? Perfect.
Hold on. Do I need to share my screen again?
No, you can do. It might be useful, but I mean, people can drop you a message, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But there's a couple that I'd like to go through, if possible, over the last 5 minutes before I let you and everyone else dive off. The first one was Jordan Diaz. How do you come up with the maximum volume of sprint work in a mesocycle and microcycle? Is that again Charlie Francis influence?
Absolutely. So yeah. in a mesocycle, and it comes from again some trial and error over the years too. Also, I looked at it as he's prescribing in a week, 800 meters. So again, a lot. And then we're talking about elite track athletes, right, that are trained at a high level. So for me, it was like, all right, let me start at half that, right? Let me start at half that and see what. Again, if I look at them, they're elite. Our guys are novice at best. I might have a few guys that we could say, okay, this guy, he's a track guy. He comes in, runs 4.3, but majority of them are novices at best. So let me cut that in half and work from there. So again, with my mesocycles, all I do is I take that, so we moved it to 600 yards is my total for an entire week, 600 yards. So again, I just times that by 4. If I have a 4 week, now it would be times that by 3 if it was a 3 week block. You get what I'm saying? So again, 600 yards for my microcycle is going to be my highest. And then based on where I am in the training year, if I'm earlier in the training year, I'm only going to use 80% of that, right? I'm not going to go 100% off the bat. I'm going to use 80% of that and then build and as I move through and navigate the annual calendar.
Nice, mate. So in terms of staying away from that medium zone that you talked about, are you timing every all the sprints that the guys do, so you can then decide whether they should be finishing the session if there's some like residual fatigue in there. So if they're not hitting that threshold, you can reduce the volume.
So on Thursdays is when we time sprints.
Okay.
And again, yeah, there's been times where, you get a kid and he's fast and what he should be around. And off the top of my head, we had a kid named Justin McKithen. He ran a 2.65 and a 20, and he ran it 3 weeks straight. And then all of a sudden we go out there and he ran a 2.71. I'm like, whoa, like, was it coach error? Was it time error? What's the deal? And then he ran a 2.71 again. And I'm like, all right, we need to shut you down.
Yeah.
And it's, again, I think it's a science and an art. In the team setting, it's hard because, again, you pull a kid out and you got football coaches out there at that workout. What are they going to say to you? Like, oh, why are you being soft on him, this and that? But at the same time, I think we have a good relationship with our football coaches where they understand, it's about winning games on Saturdays in September, October, and November versus winning a Monday run, So, but you want to make sure kids are honest too, and they're not just BSing, because you get that too. But yeah, I definitely the timing of it, and I think it has more implication as far as prescription the following week. So if it's like a global thing, we're gonna modify what we do the following week, right? Or if it's just for him specifically, like all of his markers, because we're gonna look at his vertical jump, his depth jump, we're gonna look at his body weight. If all those start pulling up red flags, then yes, we'll modify for that individual specifically.
Yeah, nice. So just one last one before I let you go, because I know we're at time. A nice, easy one for you, hopefully. What VBT system do you plan on using and why versus others?
One we can afford.
Good answer.
I've looked at, VMAX Pro just came out with some pretty cool stuff. I had Push at Colorado State. And I thought the reliability of it was good. Obviously each system has its pros and cons. I've looked at just going back to, because I can't afford GymAware, I can't afford Purge. Like I just don't have the budget for it, right? We're trying to buy peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for kids. So, but I did like I've been thinking about going back to just regular Tendos if we get the budget for it, just because it's the simplicity of it. It's like you're a Moffitt hit on it a whole bunch. It's intensive because you're gonna have an intern basically essentially writing down every number, but I mean you make do.
Yeah, absolutely. Superb. Thanks, Joey. Really appreciate that. And anyone that wants to get in touch, drop your message on socials or email.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, mate. We're done.
All right. I got the glasses on. I got a little bit of glare. Hey, thanks again to everybody who made it out. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks, Joey, for closing us out with intensity. I appreciate that. And again, just thanks to all the companies that have donated. Thanks to everybody who has pitched in to the GoFundMe. Just to sort of follow up, we are starting up again next weekend. It's going to be a little bit different format, but definitely check out the website for that. Love to have you guys join us then as well. And not sure if I'm forgetting anything. I probably am. It's been a bit of a long day. We have our conference tomorrow as well. So if you're looking for an opportunity for more CEUs, you can check that out on our website, hawkindynamics.com. It's my only plug. And other than that, once again, just a big thanks to you, Rob and Drake. Rob, you were amazing, even if I did give you some joke or give you a hard time on Twitter. Mate. I felt obligated. But yeah, again, to everybody that stuck around till the end, we really appreciate it and look forward to rejoining and firing everything up next week. So we're gonna be seeing you in about a week. Take care.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Rob.